When it comes to capturing the public interest, very few things are as successful as the occult. Ghost stories are told around campfires, urban legends about killer cults are whispered at sleepovers, and cautionary tales about demons and devils are used to remind people to behave. These are just a few examples of our collective fascination with occult topics, and unfortunately, these more light-hearted and nostalgic variations are not where that fascination ends. In this video, we'll be revisiting some of the cases I've covered over the past 6 years that feature these cultish or ghostly themes. Before we get into it, I'm Joshua Miles and I cover lesser known true crime cases from all over the world here on my YouTube channel. If that's something that you would be interested in, then make sure to leave a like and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new true crime cases. And with all that being said, let's revisit some of the more peculiar cases that we've covered on this channel. Would you ever consider looking to the dwellers of the afterlife to solve a murder? In this first case, a jury did just that. With the help of a Ouija board, drunken jurors sought out spectral feedback on the case before determining whether the individual on trial was innocent or guilty. This is the story of the murders of Harry and Nicola Fuller and the jurors who made a joke out of their trial. Nicola Barbara Johnson was born on the 27th of July 1965 in Tonbridge, Kent, England, to parents Michael and Barbara Johnson. Not too long after Nicola was brought into the world, her parents had a second child called Michelle, giving Nicola a younger sister. Now, not all too much is known about Nicola's upbringing, but what we do know is that she was described as, quote, an English rose, very unassuming and very quiet. Her family further described her as being a, quote, private, dainty little girl. Nicola actually obtained a business studies qualification in Tunbridge in her early adulthood, and through her 20s, she held down regular jobs to keep money coming in. It appeared she had her life on track. Everything seemed to be going well for Nicola, and her life was about to change for the better when, in June of 1992, Nicola's little sister Michelle got married. And Michelle's new husband had a friend that Michelle wanted her sister to meet, and so Nicola was introduced to a man called Harry Fuller. Harry Fuller had been born on the 31st of August 1947, also in Tonbridge, Kent, England. As with Nicola, we don't know that much about Harry as a teenager or really as a young adult, though he would be described in local newspapers later on as, quote, a car dealer who also had interests in the building trade and in the property business. Further accounts of Harry would later detail the 45-year-old as being a shady wheeler dealer, a wealthy rogue, a flyboy, and a conman. Harry had been described as being promiscuous, citing his long history of relationships with other women. He had 2 ex-wives before he had met Nicola, and a string of girlfriends in between them. Harry had actually had a child with one of his previous ex-wives, and this ex-wife was called Elizabeth, and they lived nearby. It's important to note that we were unable to find the existence of Harry's first wife in the official records, so we're unsure of when the marriage had happened or if it had even happened to begin with. Elizabeth and Harry had moved together to Crowborough after the storm of 1987 swept through the area, causing destruction. The couple's neighbours would later recount their experience of Harry by saying, quote, Harry offered to replace 6 slates blown off my roof and charged me £200 for it. I was a bit frightened of him, so I paid up. Then he dug up my front path, saying he smelt gas and there must be a leak. He went around on his hands and knees with a lighted match, found nothing, and then charged me to relay the path. Another neighbour described a time that Harry had been asked to repair a chimney for them. Quote, he got up there with a sledgehammer and the whole lot came through my porch and left a big hole in the top of my house. There was nothing I could do because he made me pay £800 by cheque before he did the job. He was a big bloke and I found him a bit intimidating. He was always banging about with cars. At the time, he was driving a Porsche, and there were always cars lined up in the streets. I don't know much about him other than that. The police came round once or twice. Harry was described as being somebody who was larger than life, and definitely somebody that you'd remember, though he was also somebody that made enemies. One account details of how he had been dangled by his ankles from a balcony in Woolwich, London, before his Porsche was driven into the Thames. The marriage between Elizabeth and Harry hadn't been one that was destined to last, with the couple divorcing not long after the birth of their first and only child. And as we know, in June of 1992, Harry and Nicola were introduced to one another by Nicola's sister Michelle, marrying one another in August of that same year. This whirlwind romance was described by her family as being a roller coaster, rather quick. Nicola's father Michael, when asked about this, said, quote, "Once it started, there was no way of stopping it. We grew to like him very much. He used to come here for Sunday lunch most weekends." Harry very quickly became a popular member of the family. Nicola and Harry moved to Wadhurst, Sussex in the October of 1992, soon after their wedding, and rented a property called Blackman's Cottage. It was the perfect property for the newlyweds, especially as there had been a free car parking lot, which meant that Harry could park all the cars he wanted there. He was always buying cars and looking for somewhere to store them, so it was great for him. Despite Harry being unable to confidently read or write, on part due to his dyslexia, his business dealings after he moved to Wadhurst with Nicola were bustling. Most of his business was conducted over the phone, and his transactions were always conducted in cash, which meant that he oftentimes carried a lot of cash with him. Nicola's family saw Harry as coming from a different way of life than them, but they were happy that he had been able to bring Nicola out of her shell, and she evidently enjoyed her life with him. Harry was protective over Nicola, and he always brought her flowers, which he displayed all over the couple's cottage. Nicola had also found part-time work at a job in Tunbridge Wells, which she enjoyed. As February of 1993 came around, the couple decided to book a holiday together to Lanzarote during the week commencing February 15th, and they were both super excited to go on this much welcome break away. Nicola was also excited to go on this holiday so she could get a nice suntan before the summer months rolled around. It's important to note that in early February, Harry decided to start recording his phone calls, which included any inbound and outbound calls at the couple's cottage. Why exactly, it's not clear, but this decision would play a critical role in this case. Tuesday, the 9th of February 1993 was a cold day, as the people of Wadhurst said their last goodbyes to the winter weathers before starting to welcome the summer sun. Nicola had gone to work in Tunbridge Wells that day, as she had always done. Harry had spent the early part of the afternoon that Tuesday with a friend that he'd known for around 13 years. You see, his friend had asked Harry to help him buy a new car at a local auction, and Harry jumped at the opportunity. He had helped his friend buy a car previously, and so was excited to kit his friend out with the latest bells and whistles at a steal of a price. Both Nicola and Harry returned to their cottage in the early evening, and Nicola began to get herself ready to go out with some friends to go to a reunion at a restaurant in Tunbridge Wells that was due to start between 7 and 8 p.m. that night. Harry arranged with Nicola to pick her up from the restaurant at about 11 p.m. that night. Now, not long after Nicola had left for the reunion, Harry received a phone call from an unidentified caller on the cottage's landline phone. And due to the fact that Harry had been recording his calls, again, we're not quite sure why, an audio recording of this call exists. Let's take a listen to this call.
How are you doing? Very well indeed. It couldn't be better. I popped over last night to see you. What time? About 7. I was up the gym, up at the golf club. Oh. At Tysus. There were some lights on, but I knocked. Right. See you in the morning, my darling. Hey, matey. 8 o'clock. Yeah. Bye. Ciao now.
Despite Harry actually being a late riser, he arranged with this unknown man on the phone to meet early the next morning. This was very unlike Harry. He was the kind of person that appreciated the comforts of his bed into the late morning. Regardless, he went to pick up Nicola as agreed, and the couple both returned back to their cottage. Wednesday the 10th of February 1993, at 6:30 a.m, a postman delivering the mail on the couple's street was suddenly startled by a car pulling out from behind Nicola and Harry's cottage. This was very out of the ordinary to the postman, as it was usually very quiet on the road at that time. The car that had so suddenly pulled out had been a dirty Ford Escort. Unfortunately, the postman managed to get a good look at a passenger that was in the car. He described this passenger as appearing to be between 35 to 40 years old, tall and well built, though he only saw this passenger for a few moments before the vehicle drove off down the road towards Tumbler Brails. At 7:05 a.m, an anonymous witness saw two men get out of a cream-coloured Sierra and walk up the path to the cottage and enter. Now, importantly, nobody saw the two men leave the property. About 55 minutes later, just after 8 a.m, another witness reported seeing a long black bonneted vehicle, possibly a Jaguar, pull into the car park behind the couple's cottage, and they saw a man wearing a long black coat that was almost to the floor get out of the car and walk in the direction of Blackman's cottage. At around 8:30 a.m, not half an hour later, Harry left the cottage with the front door to the property ajar. At 8:33 a.m, Harry was caught on CCTV going into the local tobacconist to pick up some cigarettes, after which he returned back to the cottage at about 8:35 a.m. Half an hour prior, at 8 a.m, Nicola's mother had tried ringing Nicola as she hadn't heard from her since the previous Sunday, and she'd known about the reunion she'd gone to and wanted to catch up. When Nicola's mother had tried to ring the cottage's landline at 8 a.m. that morning, the line had been engaged, and so Nicola's mother continued to try to ring Nicola every 5 minutes until 9:15 a.m. At 8:43 a.m. that morning, not 10 minutes after Harry had returned to the cottage after purchasing some cigarettes, a 999 call to emergency services was placed from the couple's landline phone. It would later be determined that this phone call had been made by Nicola, and that she, at that point, had been severely wounded. By the time that call was placed, Harry had already died. Both Nicola and Harry had been shot.
You know, she just seems to have found happiness and then suddenly it's snatched away from her, which seems dreadful. Absolutely dreadful. Anyone could do that to her. I feel that there's part of me that's gone, and there is this big hole that's never going to be filled. And I do miss her so.
Nicola was unable to communicate with the 999 emergency services operator due to the fact that her jaw had been shattered by a gunshot wound. The operator, upon answering the call, believed that there had been a child on the other end of the line, so asked Nicola, who, as we said, couldn't communicate with them, "Is Mummy there?" 17 seconds into the call with emergency services, the operator heard a scream followed by the sound of a shot. This was the sound of the final shot in the horrific attack on the couple, and it had been fired through a duvet to muffle it at Nicola. The call itself with 999 continued on for 5.5 more minutes, in which you can hear the sound of footsteps and the sound of the opening and closing of drawers. It's important to note the sheer effort required for Nicola to get to the phone with the injuries that she had sustained to place the call to emergency services.
I think the nightmares that you have are of the fact that somebody desperately needs help. I know that she crawled a long way, she got to a phone, she managed to dial 999 and nobody came. And that keeps you awake at 3 o'clock in the morning. Night after night.
After Nicola's parents had been unable to make contact with her that morning, they decided to try and contact her place of work to see if she'd been there. Maybe the couple's landline wasn't working properly or something like that. Though when they spoke with Nicola's manager, they were told something that made their hearts sink into their stomachs. Nicola hadn't shown up for work that morning. That was extremely out of character for her, especially without telling anyone why she couldn't get to work or, just giving any reasons why. At around 7 to 8 p.m. that evening, Nicola's parents, who had still been unable to make contact with her, decided to contact the local authorities, who subsequently dispatched 2 officers to the cottage. The officers met Nicola's parents at the cottage to find both the front and back doors to be locked. Nicola's parents then informed the officers that Harry kept large sums of money in the house due to the nature of his job, and that the couple's cars were still parked at the property. After a bit of back and forth between the officers and Nicola's parents, and after Nicola's father gave his permission, the two officers broke down the front door to the property in order to gain access to the house. As they entered the cottage, the eerie silence was immediately noticeable, and it was unnerving. And Nicola's parents knew at that very moment that something had been very, very wrong. The officers searched the cottage, and tragically, they found both Harry and Nicola murdered inside. Harry's body had been found to have a white substance scattered on it, which the investigators believed was intended to make it seem as if the killings had been drug-related. This powder was sent to be analysed, and it was identified to have actually been sucrose and not some kind of illegal substance. The investigators determined that 5 shots total had been fired during the murders, though they had only been able to locate 2 cases within the cottage, which was indicative of the fact that the killer or the killers had collected any cases that they had found. One of the 2 cases that the authorities had located had been found in Nicola's dressing gown, and it was found to have come from the gunshots that had ultimately killed her, with the second of the 2 cases being found underneath Harry's body. As we mentioned, both the front and back doors to the cottage were locked and secured, with no signs of forced entry, which, as I'm sure you've deduced, is indicative of the fact that the killer or killers had been invited into the couple's cottage and likely knew them. Harry's body had been found in the downstairs of the house, and he had sustained a singular shot through the heart, which had killed him. And Nicola had been found upstairs in the property, and she had sustained 4 gunshot wounds. The police launched an extensive investigation following the murders. Detectives delved into the background of Harry Fuller and explored the relationships he had with numerous people in an effort to try and find any kind of motive for the senseless murders. From these inquiries, it became clear to the authorities that Harry had been a man who had been involved, as we mentioned earlier on, in what the detectives described as enterprises on the edge of legality, and that he had connections to people who were involved in even more serious criminal activities. They initially speculated that the murders of the Fuller couple had been related to something in the criminal underworld. It was clear to the investigators that a number of people had clear grudges against Harry. This was because Harry was likely seen as a, quote, grass by some criminals due to him giving information to the authorities in relation to his car sales business, aka he was a part-time police informant. In fact, 5 days before the murders, Harry had actually told a detective that he had been having trouble with a man who we'll call Jonathan to protect their identity due to an allegation that Harry had been, quote, grassing and car ringing, which was an allegation stemming from late 1992. The police actually spoke with a witness who had been told by Harry in 1992 that there had been people after him with, quote, shooters. The investigators then found the 2 call recording machines in the couple's cottage that Harry had, again for unknown reasons, started using to record calls a few days before the murders. The details around these recording devices are a little bit confusing, so stick with me for this next section. On one of the tapes from one of the machines, the police found a recording of a message that contained a threat aimed at Harry for the following morning. Investigators were able to determine that this threatening message had been placed by a man who we'll call Mark for identity protection purposes. You see, Mark and Harry had actually had a fight back in October of 1992, around the same time that Harry and Nicola had moved into Blackman's cottage. Now, the prosecution in this case would claim that this message, which had been the last message on that tape, had been left in either October or November of 1992, months before Harry had started recording his calls. It could be said that Harry might have recorded calls previously but had stopped, but it really isn't clear. Mark alleged that any contact between him and Harry had been severed by November of 1992, which was months before the murders. Though Nicola's mother told the police that she believed that a message on the tape that she had left had preceded the message left by Mark and had actually been left by her shortly before the murders. The police also learned in the course of their investigations that Mark had been the owner of an Audi motorcar, which matched the description of the one seen by a witness on the day of the murders. Investigators, despite this, and in the name of due diligence, took a closer look at the relationships between Harry and other people to see what more they might find. One of these connections had been that Harry and a man who we'll call Henry for, again, identity protection purposes. Henry had previously had dealings with Harry concerning a BMW, which Henry believed to have been ringed, car ringing being a stolen car that has its identification replaced by a set from another car. And so Henry reported this to the police. The investigators then took a closer look at the relationship between Harry and Jonathan, who we spoke about earlier and who Harry had told the police 5 days before his murder had been giving him trouble. The police actually considered Jonathan to be sufficiently connected with the events of the case that he could be arrested on suspicion of murder, which he was, though he was subsequently released. Jonathan was known to have been a violent person, with witness accounts detailing of how he may have threatened people with shotguns. However, the police were satisfied that Jonathan hadn't been in the area at the time of the murders due to the locational data of his mobile phone, which placed him at a significant distance from the cottage at the time. Side note, they used a method of mobile phone positioning called triangulation and not GPS, which is where they use the connection strengths from 3 or more mobile phone masts to determine where exactly the phone had been. The investigators then turned their attention to a man called Stephen Young, who had business connections to Harry Fuller. On the 22nd of February 1993, 2 police officers paid Stephen a visit at his office in order to question him about his relation to Harry. Stephen told the authorities that his connection was that he, Stephen, had run an insurance broker's agency and that he had been in the process of obtaining business from Harry at the time of the murders and that he had actually known him for quite a while due to this business. Following this, the authorities decided to work with the BBC television show Crime Watch so that they could broadcast the recording of the phone call that Harry had taken the evening before the murders, in which he had arranged a meeting with this unknown male for the following morning. They hoped that the publication of this audio might bring in some leads. Maybe somebody might recognize the voice. It was broadcast on the 15th of April 1993, and it paid off. 2 people contacted the authorities claiming to have recognized the voice in the phone call recording. None other than Stephen Young's neighbor and Stephen Young's sister-in-law. As a result of this, 2 days after the broadcast, Stephen Young voluntarily went to the police with a 2-page statement that he had typed. In this statement, he claims that it had been his voice in the recording and that he had arranged this meeting with Harry as he had intended to sell him a Porsche motorcar on behalf of an acquaintance. Stephen claimed to have arrived at the couple's cottage later than 8 a.m. due to roadworks, stating that he had arrived at about 8:20 a.m. After arriving at the cottage, he claims that the curtains had been drawn and that Harry's Jaguar motorcar hadn't been in the car park. Stephen stated that he knocked on the front door and was surprised to have not received any kind of response from inside the property. So Stephen apparently left for a short while before coming back and knocking on the door once more, but again, nobody responded. The statement goes on to say that he left at 8:40 a.m. and went back to his office as he had an appointment. Following this statement, the police arrested Stephen Young in connection to the case and subsequently interviewed him over a period of 3 days. Throughout these interviews, Stephen maintained his original statements, though included more detail. Most notably, the name of the person who he had the appointment with in the office that morning. The police focused their attention and their inquiries on Stephen Young in light of the information that he had provided. And they quickly learned that Stephen had actually lied in his interviews with the police and that he had actually been connected to the criminal underworld. Interestingly, investigators found bullets and cartridges inside Stephen's house that were identical to the ones found and used in the murder of Harry and Nicola. And importantly, they were able to establish a motive. This motive for the murder of the Fuller couple had been due to the fact that Stephen had been experiencing severe financial difficulties. CCTV footage was further uncovered by the authorities, which showed Stephen arriving considerably earlier than the 8:20 a.m. time that he had claimed in his statements and interviews, showing him arrive at 8:03 a.m. and, instead of leaving at 8:40 a.m. as he had claimed, it showed Stephen to have left at 9:10 a.m. On top of this, they discovered a phone call that Stephen had made to Harry at 8:10 a.m. on the morning of the murders, which Stephen had neglected to inform the authorities about in either his statement or his interviews. Additional analysis of the bullets and cartridges determines the bullets to have been scored in an identical fashion to the ones found at the crime scene, and that the cartridges showed signs which indicated they had been fired from the same gun used in the murders. A closer search of Stephen's home uncovered a spent bullet, which was of a similar kind and which had been clearly discharged from the same gun used in the murders. They also found a modified Browning pistol under the bed of one of his children, which clearly hadn't been there for any legitimate purpose. Investigators explored the suspected motive for Stephen murdering Harry and Nicola, and they found that his financial position had been very precarious. Stephen had set up his own insurance broking business in 1986, though by the spring or summer of 1992, he had found himself extremely short of money due to him not handing over premiums that he had been receiving from his clients to the insurance companies, and instead pocketing the premiums for his own use. His mortgage had risen to £75,000, which he was behind on by £4,000. He had owed £5,500 and £6,500 on a personal loan, another £25,000 to his in-laws, and had other debts totaling £13,000. On top of that, he owed £40,000 to insurance companies due to him pocketing the premiums. And by February of 1993, the month of the murders, he was being chased by those insurance companies, and they all were requiring the payment of a significant sum of money by the end of February, or his agency with them would be terminated. The man that Stephen had an appointment with on the morning of the murders had actually been a representative from the provincial insurance company, and this man told the authorities that they had met after 10:30 a.m. that morning, and not at 9 a.m. as Stephen had claimed in his statements and interviews. Interestingly, at that meeting, Stephen handed this man a cheque for £6,000, which had been post-dated to the 11th of February 1993, so the next day. When the police took a closer look at Stephen's bank accounts, they discovered that on the 11th of February, he had deposited £6,000 in cash into his accounts and had further paid an outstanding post office bill for £330 in cash. All of this formed the essence of the trial against Stephen Young, which commenced in March of 1994. It must be noted that a lot of money had been stolen from the Fuller cottage, and this was the motive. This was what they thought Stephen's motive was based on. He'd gone in, murdered them, and taken their money. Now, during this trial, Stephen gave an account of the events of the 10th of February 1993 that differed from the accounts he had given in his initial statement and subsequent interviews with the police. Let's take a look at how this account was described by the court documents. Quote, "At the trial, his account was that, as far as the events of the 10th of February were concerned, he had in fact gone into the cottage. The circumstances he described in the following way. He had made his initial visit to the cottage and obtained no reply. He returned to the cottage, as he had previously described, but then had seen the back door ajar. He'd gone into the cottage, and there he'd seen Harry Fuller lying on the floor. He then left without having made any further investigation of what might have happened in that house. He accepted that the timings on the CCTV footage had been correct, in other words, that he had arrived at about 8:03 a.m. in Wadhurst and had left at about 9:09 a.m. And he explains the fact that he had left so late because he had been concerned about what to do, having seen the body on the floor. He was concerned because he had sold to Harry Fuller a replica Walther PPK pistol, which fired the source of bullets that he considered could well have been used to kill Harry Fuller in January of 1993. He had not only sold him that pistol, but also bullets of the type which were found to have killed the Fullers. As he left the cottage, he saw a face in an upstairs window. He was unable to recognise the face. However, between the 10th of February and the time that he ultimately went to the police in April, he received 3 threatening phone calls, which he considered were clearly intended to frighten him, on the basis that the caller may have thought that he, Stephen, had recognised the face that he had seen at the window. Those threats did not merely involve Stephen, but also Stephen's family. He told the jury that he had returned from Wadhurst, the village where the couple lived, to a meeting with a representative from the provincial insurance company, which he had put at 9:30 a.m. or thereabouts, not as late as the representative has put it, and described how he handed over the cheque. As far as money was concerned, which was paid in the next day, that was money which had been saved up over a period, originally to pay off a debt he owed to somebody else. He denies that he was in such deep trouble financially that he was desperate to obtain money from any source. It was pure unhappy coincidence that he was there that fatal morning. He had no reason to kill the Fullers. The jury in Stephen's trial deliberated for 6.5 hours after the 4-week trial had come to an end. And on the 23rd of March 1994, they returned a unanimous verdict of guilty on 2 charges of murder for Harry and Nicola Fuller. Stephen Young subsequently was sentenced to 2 life sentences for the murders. Now, as I'm sure you're aware from the title of this video, this is not where this case ends. And in fact, something so beyond bizarre and unheard of took place during this jury's deliberations. The sentencing and justice served seemed to have been a success, and the legal process of sending Stephen to prison to serve his sentence had swung into motion. The Fuller's families and friends could finally find some kind of closure and move forward. At least that's what they believed and hoped. Just 1 month after the trial had come to a close, on the 24th of April 1994, a headline plastered the front page of the newspaper The News of the World, appearing completely out of the blue. Quote, "Murder Jury's Ouija Board Verdict." The article goes on to state, "The murder trial jurors who used a Ouija board before reaching their verdict held the séance after a bawdy booze-up, says the colleague who blew the whistle on them." But this seemingly out-of-the-blue article hadn't actually been the first time that the Crown Court had heard these allegations. In fact, earlier that same week, on Tuesday the 19th of April 1994, the Crown Court received a 3-page handwritten letter dated for the day previous. The contents of this letter have never been made public, but the article in the tabloids made it clear what it contained. I must quickly say that the book The Ouija Board Jurors, Mystery, Mischief and Misery in the Jury System by Jeremy Gans has been pivotal in my coverage of this case, and you can find a link to it in my sources. We're going to be taking a look at some of the extracts from this book and also some extracts from the court documents relating to what happened with the jury. A further headline smeared across the tabloid that read, "Booze, dirty jokes, and then the Ouija board." It alleged that some of the jurors had been drinking together at the hotel bar, and somehow the talk of seances came up. Further, some jurors allegedly told some off-colour jokes, but those jokes would be the least of their troubles. The article goes on to detail a letter that had been penned by a member of the jury called Adrian. Quote, "I just couldn't live with myself. To me, this was a miscarriage of justice. I thought to myself, this is someone's life we're dealing with. I was astonished that these grown-up people had played this child's game." You see, Adrian had been the youngest member of the jury at the trial, and he had apparently spent countless sleepless nights after the verdict, quotes, lying awake at night thinking about it, and even dreaming about Harry Fuller. Adrian decided that he should talk to his parents, which then afterwards he spoke with the Citizens Advice Bureau, who then advised him to go speak with a solicitor. This is his account of what happened over the deliberation period. There had been 12 jurors on the trial, and when they retired to consider their verdict on the 22nd of March 1994, they had been unable to reach a decision that day, and so were accommodated overnight at a local hotel to return the next day to continue their deliberations. But that night at the hotel, when the talk of seances came up, Adrian stated that he had been interested to hear what they said. Quote, "I was interested to hear what they said, but found it funny. Those who had done it before were laughing about it, but those who hadn't were quite serious. We had a curfew of 11 p.m. and had to be in our rooms before then. I went 10 minutes early because I had 3 pints and was quite tipsy. Another woman had a headache and went to bed early. I didn't get a good night's sleep because I'd drunk too much and felt a bit rough and the bed wasn't too comfortable." One of the jury produced 2 pieces of paper and started talking about the previous night. I overheard and at first couldn't believe it. They had secretly gone to one of their rooms and gone through with it. I didn't think anything else about Ouija boards until the next morning when it was raised again halfway through breakfast. The 12 of us on the jury and the 2 court bailiffs were sitting round a long table. He just came out with it and said, "We've done a Ouija board and got in contact with Harry and Nicola." He said he and 3 female jurors went to one of their rooms that had a few drinks and just decided to do it. Of course, following the receipt of this letter, an investigation was launched. They firstly had to determine whether or not the court could even look into the matter at all, and if so, how far they could do so. This was due to Section 8 of the Contempt of Court Act of 1981, which states, "It is a contempt of court to obtain, disclose or solicit any particulars of statements made, opinions expressed, arguments advanced, or votes cast by members of a jury in the course of their deliberations in any legal proceedings. This does not apply to any disclosure of any particulars. A, in the proceedings in question for the purpose of enabling the jury to arrive at their verdict, or in connection with the delivery of that verdict. Or B, in evidence in any subsequent proceedings for an offence alleged to have been committed in relation to the jury in the first mentioned proceedings, or to the publication of any particulars so disclosed. Essentially, what happens in the room when the jury are deliberating stays in that room, and the courts aren't allowed to know any details bar their verdict, unless the jury needs assistance in arriving at their verdict, or if they have committed an offence whilst making their deliberations. The courts had to figure out to what extent they could find out what had happened with the jury. It was concluded that, predominantly based on the facts that the jurors are required to be kept together during all deliberations, and that jurors must not continue the deliberations at the hotel, which they had been told by the judge, the court were entitled to inquire into what happened at the hotel, but not as to what happened thereafter in the jury room. It was ordered that affidavits be collected from each of the 12 jurors and from the 2 bailiffs that had been looking after them at the hotel. The Treasury solicitor, in conjunction with a senior police officer, took charge of the inquiry. The affidavits collected did have some difference of detail, but they gave what the courts described as a reasonably clear and consistent account of what had occurred in the hotel. After dinner, there had been a conversation amongst some of the jurors about Ouija boards. One of the bailiffs apparently spoke out strongly against them, as did a lady juror, and the other bailiff agreed, saying, quote, not to be so stupid. At around 11 p.m. that night, the bailiffs moved the jurors to their rooms. Thereafter, it is clear that 4 jurors, the foreman and 3 women, got together in the room of one of the women. A Ouija board was then set up. I'm sure most of you know what a Ouija board is, but just in case, it's a board used at a seance to seek messages from the spirits of absent or deceased persons. In this case, there hadn't been a formal Ouija board present, and so letters of the alphabet were printed on scraps of paper and a glass was used as a pointer. The jurors present then put a finger on the glass, which then moved towards a succession of letters, thereby perpetrating to reveal a message. It's interesting to note that the court documents detail that at least some of those present only began this procedure as a joke or a harmless prank. After perpetrating to receive messages from persons known or related to 2 of the jurors, one of which had been deceased, the following occurred according to one of the jurors that had been present. Ray, who was one of the jurors present, the foreman, then asked, quote, is anyone there? The glass went to yes. Ray said, who is it? The glass spelled out, Harry Fuller. When I say the glass spelt it out, I mean it went to each letter. I realised Harry Fuller was the subject of the evidence we were hearing. Ray said, who killed you? The glass spelt out Stephen Young, done it. Ray said, how? The glass spelt shot. Ray said something else, and the glass spelt shotgun and pistol. Ray said, where is the gun? The glass spelt police. Ray also asked who killed Nicola, and the glass spelt out Stephen Young. Ray then cut out paper and put the numbers 0 to 10 on them and put them in an inner circle. The alphabet was on an outer circle. Previously, Ray had asked the motive and the glass had spelt out money. Ray asked where it was and the glass spelt case. He then asked how much had been taken and the glass spelt out 63,000. Ray asked where the money was now and the glass spelt out bag. Ray asked where, and the glass spelt out, Harry Brinklow, room above office. We then discussed among ourselves what we should do, and the glass spelt out, tell police. I said we can't. It then spelt out, later, us and you. It continued, vote guilty tomorrow. During this time, Ray made notes. It is only right to say I was crying by this time, and the other ladies were upset as well. We realised it had gone too far, and we ended the exercise. Ray threw the paper away. We retired to our rooms and agreed not to relate what we'd done to anyone. Contrary to that agreement, the jurors did discuss the seance at breakfast the following morning with the other jurors, who had not been present. On top of this, more than one of the jurors admitted that they had too much to drink and had been feeling worse for it the next morning. Neither of the bailiffs appeared to have been aware of that, or the fact that 4 of the jurors had met up in one room over a Ouija board in the middle of the night. The inquiry and the court had several questions to answer before they could move forward. Had it been merely a drunken game which the court should disregard? The 3 women jurors who had been at this seance had become very upset about it. One was crying and had taken the view that it had gone too far. Further, why, if it was just a game, had these 3 women had these reactions? And why, when the verdict had been unanimous, had one juror, who hadn't been at the seance, been so concerned that they consulted a solicitor and made a statement about what had happened? The inquiry concluded by stating that after considering all the circumstances, they found that there was a real danger that what occurred during this misguided Ouija session may have influenced some jurors and may thereby have prejudiced Stephen Young. And for those reasons, a retrial was ordered in October of 1994. This retrial commenced on the 21st of November 1994 and lasted 5 weeks, concluding on the 11th of December 1994. And Stephen Young was found guilty of the murders again, receiving the same sentencing of life imprisonment on each count concurrently. Appeals were filed, but nothing much came of them, and they were dismissed. Stephen Young's minimum term was set at 20 years, less than 11 months and 5 days that he'd spent on remand. Nicola's father told the media that the Ouija jurors had made a complete joke of his daughter's death, and I completely agree. The level of detachment from reality those jurors showed was beyond disrespectful and downright disgusting. I'm glad, though, that justice prevailed in this case, and as far as I can tell, no formal charges have actually been brought against those jurors who took part in the Ouija board readings. They all denied convicting Stephen Young on the basis of what the Ouija board had said and had described it as just being a joke. But whatever the case, we can only hope that both Harry and Nicola's families and friends have been able to find closure and move forward with their lives, keeping their loved ones close to heart. In the 70s and 80s, America was fully gripped by a cultural phenomenon referred to as the Satanic Panic, an odd shift resulting in paranoia within the general public that satanic cults were everywhere. A notable chunk of the public became wary of occult things, even labelling things that were not occult as satanic. Crimes were not immune to this, with several murders being erroneously linked with cults, despite it not really being the reality of the situation. This case might be one of those examples. This is the tale of the so-called Falls River cult. And just as a side note for this one, my microphone was acting up during the recording of it, so I apologize in advance. I did try my best to touch it up, but wanted to warn you just in advance that it might sound a little bit different. Fall River, Massachusetts is a quiet city in Bristol County with a population of just under 90,000 residents. The city is most well known for its non-profit maritime museum and war memorial, Battleship Cove, which is actually the largest collection of World War II naval vessels in the world. The Maritime Museum was established in August of 1965 in Fall River, and the residents were over the moon with more than 250,000 visitors coming to the museum in its first year of operation. Though not 14 years later, the residents of Fall River would be plagued with rumours of satanic cults and devil worshippers in the area, and when a 17-year-old girl was found dead on the 13th of October 1979, the rumours turned into widespread panic. But this wasn't the first time a major tragedy struck Fall River. Almost 100 years earlier, in August of 1892, the residents of the city woke up to discover a brutal double homicide had taken place. Lizzie Borden stood accused of the axe murders of both her parents. Interestingly, Lizzie was acquitted of the murder charges, but the story remains a commonly discussed topic in local pop culture mythology. As a quick side note, today Lizzie Borden's home, where her parents were murdered, has become a bed and breakfast museum dedicated to the tale. Back in 1979, the story of Lizzie Borden and what happened to her family was still a much discussed topic. Some people believed that Lizzie Borden had become possessed by the devil, which made her do it, despite her acquittal. Others believe Lizzie Borden's parents had been killed as part of a satanic ritual by a cult practicing in the local woods. So when the discovery of a 17-year-old girl's body was made, the somewhat unfounded theory began to circulate that the devil-worshipping cults had returned to Fall River. At 5:30 a.m. on the 13th of October 1979, a couple of women jogging along the track at the Fall River High School discovered the 17-year-old's body laying face down in a pool of blood underneath the bleachers, and they immediately contacted the police. When investigators arrived on the scene, they noticed that the girl was naked from the waist down. The girl's wrists had been bound in front of her with fishing line, and a medical examination confirmed the investigators' worst suspicions. There were signs of sexual assault and torture. She had sustained multiple skull fractures along with numerous lacerations to the head. The girl's face had been completely mutilated, and nearby bloodied rocks began to give the detectives clues as to what had happened. The authorities began to collect all the nearby rocks and stones that had blood splatterings and took them into evidence. The police theorized that the rocks had been used as one of the murder weapons. But why had this happened, and who was the girl? An autopsy was conducted on the Jane Doe's body, which determined that she had further sustained numerous lacerations on her arms and torso from a blade, a secondary murder weapon. The investigators began to theorize that whoever had done this to the girl had wanted her dead, and had begun the attack with a blade before progressing to bludgeoning with a rock to, quote, finish the job. Fortunately for the Jane Doe, the authorities were able to identify her as 17-year-old Doreen Levesque. Doreen was from the nearby city of New Bedford and had run away from her family home after dropping out of high school. Not all too much information is available online to give us a solid understanding of who Doreen was, her hopes and dreams, and the exact circumstances that led her to running away. But what we do know is that after leaving New Bedford, Doreen turned to sex work in order to support herself. Doreen had been described by those who knew her as a very beautiful young woman who didn't have any real enemies. Her parents would later describe Doreen as being a rebel who was determined to go her own way. She would frequently get into trouble at both home and school, but nothing serious enough to warrant too much concern. Unfortunately for Doreen, she didn't live long enough to take a different path in life. At her funeral, a letter that Doreen had written to Jesus was read aloud. It read, "Dear Jesus, I hope I spelled your name right. Thank you for everything you've done for me and anything you might do. Someday I would like to be with you in heaven. If I have trouble following you, I would like for you to help me." This was read alongside poetry that she had also written. The medical examiner that had conducted the autopsy on Doreen had suggested that it seems like more than one person was involved in the homicide due to the use of multiple weapons. Investigators also found indications which they perceived as potentially ritualistic, leading them to believe that their worst fears had come true. The satanic cult had returned to River Falls, though they knew that the satanic cult was just a myth, rumour, and nothing more. The police were at a loss for who might have done this to Doreen, and so they decided to go to the streets where Doreen worked to uncover more information, any rumours on the streets or anything like that. The police had a handful of informants that worked on Bedford Street, the street at the time that was well known as a hub for sex work. However, after several months of trying to obtain even a whisper of information, the police were unsuccessful. Doreen's case went cold. That was until the 26th of January 1980, when another body was discovered. A dog walker was walking his beagle along a path behind an abandoned printing factory when the dog took scent of something and began to rummage through the undergrowth. The dog walker quickly realised that the dog had begun eating something, thinking that maybe the dog had found a dead animal. He tugged on the dog's leash to pull it back. That was when the dog walker realised that the dog had been eating at something with clothes. The dog walker soon realised that laying before him was a frozen, discoloured body of a woman. Winter temperatures had actually preserved the remains, preventing too much decomposition. Comparisons are quickly drawn between Doreen and this victim. Both were found partially nude, both had their hands tied together, and both had their skulls crushed by rocks. Interestingly, the investigators noted that the latest victim was lying on top of a huge stone, which they actually compared to that of an altar. Unlike with Doreen, the coroner was unable to find any evidence of sexual assault, though small shards of concrete were discovered in the victim's hair, which indicated that the primary murder weapon was that of a concrete block or brick. The murdered woman was soon identified to be 19-year-old Barbara Reposa. Just a quick side note, some sources list Barbara as being 19 years old at the time of her death, while others list her as being 22 years old. Barbara, like Doreen, was a sex worker who worked on the same street as Doreen. It's important to note that Barbara had actually been reported missing about a month after Doreen's remains had been discovered by her boyfriend at the time, 44-year-old Andy Maltius. Andy had come into the Fall River police station with concerns for his girlfriend's safety and mentioned something about a satanic cult. He also claimed to have information pertaining to the murder of Doreen, so the police arranged to have an interview with Andy to try and find out exactly what he knew. Andy was actually known to the police officers in Fall River. He was a paedophile, a sexual sadist, a violent rapist, and had recently devoted himself to Christianity. He started his interview with the police by saying, quote, "Jesus Christ is my personal Lord and Saviour. Once I worshipped Satan, now I worship Jesus." The investigators made note of the strange way the interview had started, and little did they know, the interview was about to get a lot stranger. Andy informed the investigators that at the time of Barbara's disappearance, both he and Barbara were practicing Satanists. It's important to note at this point in the episode that when I speak about Satanism and Satanists, I'm not referring to the Church of Satan religion, which is actually a very peaceful faith. You must draw a clear distinction between the Church of Satan and how I discuss this form of Satanism in this episode, and you'll realise towards the end why Satanism in this case is described and painted as being a stereotypically violent and disturbing manner of worshipping pure evil. Going forward in this episode, I will be using the term stereotypical Satanism, also known as theistic. I don't know how you pronounce it. Satan. I'm going to say stereotypical because that's what I can pronounce, to avoid confusion. Stereotypical Satanism being the stuff you see portrayed in horror movies with sacrifices and people chanting in the middle of the night around an altar of blood, and atheistic Satanism being the peaceful new religious movement, aka the Church of Satan. If you want to learn more about the Church of Satan, you can find a link in my sources down below. Andy described to the investigators that he and Barbara were practicing stereotypical Satanists who were involved in a local cult. He also revealed to the detectives that Doreen had also been involved in the local stereotypical Satanist cult too, prior to her death, but Andy claimed to have no first-hand knowledge of her murder, though he did state that he believed the local cult to be responsible for her death. Of course, the detectives listened in a state of disbelief. Was this the ramblings of a crazy man who wanted attention, or was this a nightmarish tale of reality? Aware of the understandable skepticism that the police had with Andy's story, Andy proposed that he arrange a meeting between the investigators and two other members of the stereotypical Satanist cult. With no other leads to go on, the investigators decided to entertain Andy and accepted his offer, and a few days later, detectives found themselves sitting at the other side of the table from two of the alleged cult members, Karen Marsden and Robin Murphy. The two women appeared to be complete opposites of one another. Karen was a 20-year-old single mother who was nervous and emotional, whereas Robin was a 17-year-old girl who appeared cold, deliberate, and calculated. Both Robin and Karen conducted sex work in Fall River, with Karen being a runaway and substance abuser, while Robin was an aspiring pimp and tough street kid. The investigators took note of Robin's highly domineering personality and apparent high intelligence. Robin remained quiet throughout the interview, seeming to almost study the investigators, while Karen did all of the talking. Karen revealed that she was roommates with Robin and that they were lovers on occasion, but that they weren't really all too aware or connected to Andy. He was just somebody that they knew from around. As the interview progressed, Karen became more and more emotional, rambling about anything and everything that came to her mind. That was until she finally broke, through heavy sobs and tears, while Robin sat emotionless next to her. Karen told the investigators, quote, "Carl Drew killed Doreen Levesque." The detectives had one question: who was Carl Drew? Carl was actually known to the authorities as being a 26-year-old pimp with a violent reputation. He was born and raised on a small farm in New Hampshire and had a very rough upbringing. Carl endured hard labour and physical abuse throughout his childhood and upbringing. His father was an alcoholic who made Carl do all sorts of dangerous and traumatic things, such as lowering Carl by the ankles into a well to remove dead rats. Eventually, after suffering this abuse, Carl decided enough was enough, and so he ran away from home at age 14. He eventually arrived in Fall River, where he found a home in the city's criminal underground, becoming involved with drug addicts, sex workers, and gangs. At the age of 26, Carl operated his own sex work ring on Bedford Street in Fall River, and he even had a connection to the murdered 17-year-old Doreen, because he was her pimp. Carl fit the criminal profile of the perpetrator, but the police were missing one thing. They had nothing that actually linked Carl to the murder of Doreen. The only shred of a link they had was the testimony of a nervous and emotional substance abuser, Karen. The investigators decided that their best bet was to bring Karen back in for questioning to ascertain more details from her. The police offered Karen witness protection for her cooperation in the interview, though she refused to give up any more details. Karen did say one thing to the detectives that stuck with them, however, quote, "If I turn up dead, Carl Drew was responsible." Over the next couple of weeks, the investigators kept in contact with Karen just in case she changed her mind. They wanted to know as much as they could about the now nicknamed Fall River cult. One of the interviews that was conducted with Karen was of particular interest to the police. Karen told the detectives in floods of tears that, quote, "I'm a good person, I believe in God." She went on to tell the authorities that she expected the consequences of her betrayal to the cult to be severe, potentially life-threatening. Karen described the River Fall cult as being spearheaded by Carl Drew. Carl had organised his sex work ring as a stereotypical satanic cult, which he allegedly ruled with an iron fist. He called himself the Son of Satan. He would threaten the girls that worked for him with, quote, "Satan will take his toll." Now, Karen was a devoted Christian woman, and this threat to her meant more than just a violent death, but it also meant that her soul would be sacrificed and thrown into the pits of hell for eternity. At this point in the investigation, another sex worker called Carol Fletcher had come forward to the authorities with more information about her own ties to the cult. It was then that Carol and Karen took the police to the Freetown State Forest. The two women claimed that it was within this forest that the Fall River cults conducted their meetings at night. Carol and Karen walked through the forest until they reached a green algae-covered pond. Karen explained that it was in that pond that Carl told her he would dump her body after, quote, "injecting battery acid into her veins and offering her soul to Satan if she were to speak to the authorities." Another woman actually came forward to the authorities who worked for Carl and told them that Carl had created and planned a retribution against the woman who had gotten her arrested for prostitution. Allegedly, quote, "he said he was going to kill her for it, tie her to a tree to be sacrificed, and pour warm blood from a live goat all over her face." These testimonies, collectively building against Carl, were fairly damning. The authorities just needed that final piece of solid evidence to connect him directly to either of the murders, though it soon became clear that Carl wasn't the only key player within the Fall River cult. Karen's roommate and lover, 17-year-old cold and calculated Robin Murphy, had a dark side that was slowly being revealed to the detectives. As it turns out, way before the Fall River cult had even formed, Robin had a direct interest in everything occult. Karen and others who knew Robin described her to the authorities as being psychologically unstable and having a short temper, which often ended with violence. Was Robin the leader of the Fall River cult? What was her involvement? Before the detectives could ponder on these questions any further, Andy Maltius, Barbara's boyfriend, contacted the investigators, claiming to have received details of the murder in a psychic dream. There exists transcripts of the interview with authorities that they had with Andy regarding a psychic dream, but they are rather
graphic and violent, so I won't be discussing them in detail in this episode. What's important to note about the transcripts, however, is that Andy described details that he wouldn't have known unless he was there at the crime scene when the murder had taken place. He revealed the exact positioning of Barbara's body, where her remains had been discovered, her time of death, the way she had been killed, and several other details about the murder, all of this information being information that was not public knowledge at that point. Despite Andy's claims that this newfound information was due to a psychic dream, the police were far less convinced. Andy was arrested and charged with the homicide of Barbara. After all, he was the last person to have seen her alive, and he knew crucial information that wasn't available to the public. But did Andy actually carry out the murder? Was he just a witness? What was his role? And what role did Carl and Robin have in the killing? A few days after Andy had been arrested, detectives were contacted by an unexpected informant who offered to testify against Andy as a witness to the murder. This informant being Robin Murphy. Robin claims to have been present for the killing of Doreen and of Barbara. In exchange for her cooperation, Robin made a deal with the authorities to be placed in protective custody and to be granted immunity in both of the homicide cases. Robin claims that Andy had killed his girlfriend Barbara after he found out that she was cheating on him with another man. Robin had been with Andy and Barbara on the night of her death, partying together and driving around the city. Allegedly, at some point in the night, Andy and Barbara began arguing. It was then that Andy pulled the car in behind the abandoned factory and pulled Barbara out of the vehicle before sexually assaulting her. When Barbara cried out for help, Andy began to beat her. He started with his fists and ended with a rock. Following the violent assault, Robin and Andy drove off in Andy's car, leaving Barbara behind to find her own way home. But we know now that Barbara never made it home, and she succumbed to her injuries. Robin had been hesitant to come forward to the authorities with this information, as she feared retribution from Andy, believing that he would do the same to her if she spoke to the police. This testimony, along with Andy's previous criminal history, was enough to put him behind bars for the remainder of his life. You may have noticed, though, that there exists several discrepancies between Robin's story and the findings at the crime scene. For instance, Barbara had her hands tied together when she was found, and there was no evidence found by the medical examiner of any sexual assault taking place. Further, Robin had failed to explain the numerous lacerations that Barbara, like Doreen, had sustained. Robin also failed in this testimony to explain the existence of Carl Drew's stereotypical Satanist cult. Did that cult even exist? Robin then went on to explain what exactly had happened to Doreen. She claims that the two murders were not in any way connected, despite the forensic evidence telling a contradicting story. The only identical factor, according to Robin, in both murders was the fact that she had been present. According to Robin's testimony in Doreen's case, Doreen had been murdered as, quote, an offering of the soul to Satan, and Robin pinned the murder on Carl Drew. Apparently, Doreen left Carl's cult shortly before her untimely death with the hopes of working alone, but leaving the Fall River cult wasn't something Carl would let you do. Robin went on to explain that Doreen had a debt to Satan that needed to be paid, her soul. And so, Carl set about tracking down Doreen and forced her into his car. Joining Carl and Doreen in the car was Robin, Karen, and another man called Willie Smith, someone who was allegedly also part of the Fall River cult. Once Doreen was in the car, they began driving seemingly with no destination in mind. Carl told Doreen on this journey that she couldn't afford to work the streets alone before he physically assaulted her. The group then pulled in behind the high school, and Carl and Willie Smith grabbed Doreen and dragged her under the bleachers. According to Robin, she and Karen remained in the car. She heard no screams and insisted that she had seen nothing. After an unknown period of time, Robin claims that Carl and Willie Smith returned to the car without Doreen, and the group left. Robin asked Carl what had happened to Doreen, to which she replied, quote, "You don't want to know." This account of Doreen's death had more discrepancies in it than in the first. Doreen had been brutally and savagely attacked, which would have warranted loud screams and pleas for help. The police decided that they wanted to talk with Karen about Robin's account to see if there was any truth behind it. However, on the 9th of February 1980, Karen was reported as missing. 2 months later, in April of 1980, a man stumbled across the top half of a human's skull while clearing a section of land. After reporting it to the authorities, the police ordered a detailed search of the area to try to uncover any further evidence. The police's search uncovered the decomposing remains of 3 cats, sheep bones, and clumps of human hair. They further discovered some jewellery, a singular high-heeled shoe, and a piece of a woman's sweater that had been torn off. After bringing the skull back to the lab, forensic tests revealed that it belonged to Karen Marsden. Karen had been insistent with expressing her fears to the authorities that she would be the next victim in the Fall River cult's murderous rampage. She knew that she was to be sacrificed next by the cult. It wasn't long after the news broke that Karen had been found dead that a woman came forward with information that would change the investigation on its head. The woman was a former sex worker called Maureen, and she told the authorities that she had hosted a number of stereotypical satanic gatherings for the Fall River cult in her apartment. It also transpired that she was also Robin Murphy's ex-lover. That was when Maureen unveiled a critical piece of information. During a phone call with Robin, Robin had admitted to murdering Karen. Another woman also came forward and claims that Robin Murphy and Carl Drew had both been responsible for the murder of Karen. According to this witness, she had driven the cult out to the secluded wooded area where the sacrifice had taken place. Robin Murphy had, as part of a witness protection agreement with the authorities, been relocated to Dallas, Texas, as they waited for Andy, Barbara's boyfriend, to go to trial. Upon learning this new information, the authorities issued an arrest warrant for Robin in connection to Karen's murder, and she was immediately brought back to Fall River to undergo questioning. Carl Drew and another man were also indicted and arrested on suspicion of their involvement in the killing. It was during Robin's interrogation that she finally broke down and revealed the truth. Quick side note, Robin would actually change her story a few times during the trial and during parole hearings later on, so this isn't the whole truth, but it is likely the closest we'll get to it. According to Robin, Karen Marsden had become way too much of a liability. There were rumours that Karen had been speaking to the police, and Robin knew that Karen had been a witness to the murder of Doreen. Robin and Carl Drew had an emergency meeting to try and figure out what they should do next, and together they decided that the only thing they could do was to get rid of her. And so Robin, Carl Drew, and one of Carl's friends, who is called Carl Davis, but we'll refer to him as Davis in this episode. Side note, it was actually Davis that was the other man indicted and arrested in connection to Karen's death, all took part in the murder. Robin claims that Carl Drew forced her to take part, but it seems this was just an attempt to cover her own back. The group picked up Karen and drove to a wooded area before Robin dragged Karen from the car by her hair. Robin, Carl Drew, Davis, and the witness from earlier who had reported Robin and Carl Drew as Karen's murderers all took part in a ritualistic stoning of Karen, after which Carl Drew took a knife and cut one of Karen's fingers off to, quote, make her feel pain. Carl then broke Karen's neck with his bare hands. Robin then took a knife and, under the alleged commands of Carl Drew, slit Karen's throat. It was then that Carl and Davis fully beheaded Karen and began to use her decapitated head as a ball to kick around. After all of that, Carl Drew took the knife and carved an X into Karen's torso while speaking in tongues, allegedly offering her soul up to Satan, following which he dipped his thumb in Karen's blood and made an X on Robin's forehead. Apparently, it was then that Robin was allegedly made to perform oral sex on Karen's remains. Finally, Karen's beheaded remains were dumped into the woods, covered in gasoline and burnt to ashes. The trials against Andy Maltius, Carl Drew, Robin Murphy and Davis were a media frenzy. Headlines ran screaming of satanistic sacrifices, torture and murder. Andy's trial was the first out of the group to take place, and as a result of it, in January of 1981, he was found guilty of first-degree murder of his girlfriend Barbara Raposa, and was handed a life sentence without the possibility of parole. According to some sources, the trial against Andy was predominantly based on Robin Murphy's testimony against him, and eventually Andy died of cancer in 1998 behind bars. Robin Murphy's trial was interesting, to say the least. Her immunity deal was upheld for her involvement in Barbara and Doreen's murders, and so she wasn't prosecuted in those cases. Her lawyer convinced the courts that Robin, who was 17 at the time of the murders, had been under the powerful influence of the Fall River cult, which saw her actually being allowed to plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for further testimony against the rest of the group. Ultimately, Robin Murphy was given a life sentence with the possibility of parole for her part in the crimes, and after serving 24 years, she was released in June of 2004. Robin actually went on to break her parole conditions and returned to prison 7 years after her release, which is where I believe she remains to this day. The trial against Davis completely fell apart, and he actually never ended up taking the stand for the trial for any of his involvement in the murders. Interestingly, he was actually arrested a year after the trials for beating up a 3-month pregnant woman and stabbing her in the head because she had knowledge that would implicate Davis and Robin in Karen's murder. David ended up serving 7 years for the attack and is now, I believe, a free man. The final person in this case to be brought to trial was Carl Drew. Carl was found guilty of first-degree murder for the murder of Karen Marsden and was given a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Carl has since attempted to appeal those charges, but none of his appeals have been successful. It's heartbreaking and important to note that the murder of Doreen Levesque never went to trial. Justice was never found for Doreen. We may never know the truth of what actually happened in the Fall River cult. Some believe the cult was a facade to provide justification for the murders. Others, a device to instill fear in Carl Drew's employees. Others believe they did actually worship Satan. The cult was sensationalized and almost glorified by the media's coverage in this case. It perhaps played a much smaller role than is made out to be. Whatever the case, complete justice was never truly found.
Music is often what brings people together. Typically, this is a good thing. Leaving a concert with some newly made friends or connecting with others who love a band online can be a truly amazing experience. However, sometimes these connections are not for the better. This is the story of the Norwegian black metal band Mayhem and the satanic murders that would become an offshoot of the group.
If I were to say heavy metal music, I'm sure a picture of loud music, aggressive crowds, and drugs races through your mind. Despite a lot of the stereotypes surrounding heavy metal music being just a stereotype, there are some bands and some subgenres of heavy metal that really do live up to that reputation. And in a tale of international newfound musical success, church burnings, suicide and murder, let's discuss the case of Euronymous. Now, Euronymous was actually a stage name for a man called Watson Orchard. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, I'll put it on the screen. And he was born on Friday the 22nd of March 1968 in Sorandal, Norway. We're going to be referring to him as his stage name in this episode for simplicity's sake. Now, not all too much is known about his upbringing, which added an extra atmosphere of mystery to his character. We do know that his parents remained in his life throughout the course of this case and played an active role in, for lack of a better word, kind of his management, kind of. In 1983, while Euronymous was living in Oslo, he met a man called Jean Stubberud. I'll put that on screen now, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, whose stage name was Necrobutcher, and as soon as the pair met, their shared love for the bands Motorhead and Venom, both bands that I'm sure you've heard of, brought them together. It was as they were discussing this love for those bands that they agreed and decided that they wanted to start their own band. Though, despite their shared love, their ideas for the band were vastly different. Necro Butcher was very much into the heavy metal mentality of drugs and would frequently go out and party and use illegal substances. Euronymous, on the other hand, oftentimes stayed at home, writing letters and listening to artists such as Brian Eno, who was a British musician who made more ambient rock style music. The band that they formed was called Mayhem, and the music they wanted to make was nothing like anything Norway had ever seen before. The Norwegian black metal scene was practically non-existent, and they initially had a lot of difficulty booking gigs and finding a stage to perform on. The band had brought in a drummer called Mannheim, with Euronymous being the guitarist and Necro Butcher being the bassist. As they had been rarely able to play live, they got their start by recording demos on cassette tapes, which they traded with other bands. They also promoted their bands through fanzines, which are fan-made publications that were also traded. And it wasn't long before they started to form an audience, who they would sell the demo cassettes to via mail order. Their audience wasn't just forming in their home country of Norway, but also in places such as Russia, China, Australia, and America. To sing the vocals on these demo cassettes, the band hired two vocalists who went by the stage names of Messiah and Maniac, bringing Messiah into the band in 1986, but he ultimately quit by the end of that year, and then Maniac in 1987, though it is important to note that it was Euronymous who sang the lead vocals to begin with. Their ethos was rallying against religion, and in particularly Christianity. The band Mayhem describes themselves as Satanists and heavily used satanic imagery, though if you know about the Satanist religion, their beliefs don't align with the beliefs of this band. In 1987, Euronymous actually founded his own record label, which he called Post to Corpse Musical, later to be renamed Deathlike Silence Productions. In 1988, a drummer named Hellhammer joined the band after Mannheim had quit, shortly followed by a vocalist called Per Olin. Per Olin was born on the 16th of January 1969 in Stockholm, Sweden. And when I tell you that his hobbies and interests are a little bit on the strange side, I mean it. He was described by those who knew him as having a very morbid personality and having an obsession with the concept of death. In fact, when he was a child, he contracted an illness, which brought him very, very close to death, though he managed to recover. However, he believes that he was actually now, in fact, dead, and now lived in a different world. And because of this, he went by the stage name of Dead. Dead had met Euronymous through Euronymous' letters, and Euronymous had actually written and become pen pals with quite a number of people. But upon learning about Dead in more detail, Euronymous thought it would be the perfect match for the band. Dead reportedly carried around a dead crow in a jar, which he would open and inhale the fumes from so he could always perform with the stench of death in his nostrils. He also frequently made shirts with funeral announcements printed on them, and even buried his own clothing only to be dug up later so that he could perform smelling of death. Dead is also, according to some sources, one of the first people to use corpse paint in his performances. Corpse paint is essentially makeup that is worn to make you look like a corpse. Dead's obsession with death wasn't just a stage persona either. It was something that was a part of who he was as a person. And Dead's personality and outrageous image made the band's gigs notorious within the Norwegian black metal community. Anyone who was in that scene was very much aware of the band and its reputation. They had an image of taking it to the next level, and Dead stopped at nothing to further this obsession with death on the stage. He would cut himself on stage with shards of broken glass and hunting knives, which always garnered cheers from the crowd, encouraging the behavior. Further and more disgustingly, the band began to bring the decapitated heads of sheep and pigs on stage with them when they performed, staking them on mic stands and throwing them into the audience at the end of a gig. It wasn't long before the band had enough money to move into a house together, and they had found an old house in a forest just outside of Oslo, where they decided they would all live and rehearse and write their music. They moved to the house in 1990 and immediately began working on their first experimental album. It's important to note that up until this point, they hadn't yet released an album, only these demo tapes. The band, though, despite having enough money to rent this house, didn't have much left over to buy basics like food. Euronymous would constantly tell the band that they were going to be very rich one day and they just had to wait for their big break. He was a big dreamer. Now, interestingly, despite being the one who invited Dead to join the band, Euronymous did everything he could to make him feel uncomfortable. On one occasion, Euronymous had been playing this synth music really loudly in his room, which Dead absolutely hated. And so Dead had taken his pillow outside to go sleep in the woods to get away from it. Euronymous had then decided to go shoot his shotgun at birds in the woods, which kept Dead awake. He couldn't sleep in the house and he couldn't sleep in the woods. Dead suffered from depression, and as I'm sure you've gathered, he was a very dark person. And despite his mental health, he moved from Sweden to Norway, far away from his home and any friends he might have had there to join the band and any support network. Dead also wasn't the kind of person who easily made friends or really attempted to make friends, and this meant that he had begun to grow very lonely, locking himself in his room, becoming more and more depressed. According to some sources, at one point Dead actually stabbed Euronymous with a knife. Dead also interestingly sent his bandmates ammunition shells as gifts for Christmases and birthdays, and he told one of his bandmates that he was saving one of his ammunition shells for his own death. And it wasn't as if the band didn't have any weapons in their house. They had an array of guns and knives to keep them entertained, for lack of a better phrase. Dead's depression, however, got worse and worse, and Euronymous played on this and would constantly tell him that nobody liked him and that he should just kill himself. And sadly, Dead did just that. On the 8th of April 1991, the band hadn't been at the house they shared, leaving Dead alone there, and when Euronymous returned back to the house, he discovered Dead's body. The band actually only had one key to the house they shared, and when Euronymous had returned that day, he had found the house to be locked. The only window that was open was the one in Dead's room, and so to get back into the house, Euronymous had to climb through it. It was as he climbed through the window that he found Dead's body slumped against the wall. Dead had slashed his own wrists using a butcher's knife from the band's extensive weapons collection, and he had used Euronymous's shotgun to shoot himself in the head. He had left a suicide note that read, "Excuse all the blood. Nobody will ever understand this, but as a sort of explanation, I am not human. This is only a dream, and soon I will awake. I didn't come up with this now, but 17 years ago. Let the party begin." The note further has lyrics of the song Life Eternal attached to it. After discovering this note and Dead's body, Euronymous did something that was very, very weird. Instead of phoning for the police straight away, he left the house and drove to a nearby store to purchase a disposable camera. He then returned to the house to photograph Dead's corpse. According to some sources, he even rearranged items in the room for the photographs. Further to this, he collected bits of Dead's brain matter and fragments of his skull, which he would later use to make a stew from the brain matter and a necklace from the skull fragments. It was only after he had finished his collection of samples and photography session that he decided to phone for the police. After which, he then phoned Hellhammer, who was the replacement drummer in the band, to tell him what had happened. Here's an extract from the book Lord of Chaos, which features an interview with Hellhammer. Me and Euronymous and Dead were living in an old house outside of Oslo where we rehearsed, but I was at my parents' house in Oslo when it happened. I was planning to go back, but Euronymous called me and said, "You can't go back because police have closed the house." "Why?" I said. "Because Dead has gone home." "He went back to Sweden?" I asked. "No, he blew his brains out." Euronymous then phoned up Necrobutcher, the band's co-founder and bassist, to tell him what had happened. And that conversation was just as strange as the one he had with Hellhammer. Euronymous called me up the next day, recalls Necrobutcher, and says Dead has done something really cool. He killed himself. I thought, have you lost it? What do you mean cool? He says, relax, I have photos of everything. I was in shock and grief. He was just thinking about how to exploit it, so I told him, okay, don't even call me before you destroy those photos. But Euronymous didn't destroy the pictures, and instead asked Hellhammer to go get them developed, which he did. The pictures were in full colour and showed the suicide in graphic details, taken from a range of angles. When Euronymous had been given the developed photos back, he began to show them off to his friends and other bandmates. According to some sources, Necrobutcher would later tell the media that he believed that Euronymous lived in this fantasy fictional world in his head, and by forcing others to see what he had seen, that was his way of coping with the shock and grief. Euronymous, after backlash from his bandmates, then promised to destroy the photographs. Dead's suicide was a critical turning point for Euronymous, as it triggered a change in his mentality and saw him become obsessed with all things satanic and evil. He moved back into Oslo 2 months after Dead's death and opened a shop with the name of Helveti, which translates to hell. The shop was decorated satanically with medieval weapons hung on the black walls and a polystyrene tombstone in the window of the shop. The photographs that he had promised to destroy earlier were secretly kept in an envelope in the shop. Euronymous also ran his record label, which he had now named 2 Death Like Silence Productions, from the basement of the shop, which saw his bandmates frequently hanging out there along with other people in the Norwegian black metal scene. Not only did Euronymous' mentality change, so did his looks. According to an article interviewing Necrobutcher, Euronymous began to create a persona as the embodiment of an ancient evil. Promo photos from the time show him dressed in a black cloak, holding a rapier. The corpse paint has become more stylized, his gaze distant and remote. He looks like a character from a German expressionist movie. Euronymous had also invited his pen pals to come and work in his shop, including a young man who, when they had first started talking, was 13 years old. He began to surround himself with a lot of yes men, and the group he was involved with began to create this idea of hatred and frustration towards the rest of the world. The hate for Christianity grew and developed. Euronymous had also begun telling people that Dead had committed suicide because he believes that black metal had become trendy and commercialized. At some point in 1991, Necrobutcher had enough. He was stricken with the grief and shock from the loss of his bandmate and was furious at Euronymous' actions, and so he left the band, which left just 2 people in mayhem: Euronymous and Hellhammer. As I previously mentioned, Euronymous would frequently have people come and hang out at his shop from the black metal scene, including members of other bands in the genre. One of these members was a man called Louis Cachet. He also went by Varg Vikernes and Count Grishnak as his stage names. Louis had been born on the 11th of February 1973 in Bergen, Norway, and had been in bands since the age of 14. By 1991, Louis had formed a one-man band called Burzum, which was a band that would go on to be one of the most influential acts in the history of black metal. This was despite the fact that Burzum has never and had never played a single live show. It's unclear when exactly Euronymous first met Louis, but they quickly began frequently hanging out at his shop along with another man who went by the name of Blackthorn. Louis soon became Dead's replacement in the band Mayhem, playing the bass guitar, and Blackthorn was then brought in as the rhythm guitarist. They also met and hired a Hungarian-born singer called Attila Kishar to be the vocalist. There are a lot of names in this case, so I'm just going to quickly recap the important names for the remainder of this episode. So in the band Mayhem, there remains Euronymous as the guitarist, Hellhammer as the drummer, Louis aka Count Grishnak on the bass guitar, Blackthorn as the rhythm guitarist, and Attila as the vocalist. I'm going to refer to Louis as his real name for the remainder of this episode just for simplicity's sake. And it's Louis that plays a major role in the remainder of this case. He was described as being a person that always stood out from the crowd. He never drank alcohol at parties, preferring to drink cartons of milk, and was, by all accounts, a very productive and enthusiastic person when it came to music. Euronymous was actually 5 years older than Louis, and when Louis joined the band, Euronymous brought him under his wing. Euronymous even signed Louis' one-man band Burzum to his record label Death Like Silence Productions, but their friendship soon morphed into a competitive rivalry. Louis was recording and producing 2 albums a year for Burzum, while Euronymous was struggling to finish Mayhem's first full album. This quickly meant that Euronymous began to see Louis as his rival, and their rivalry wasn't just a creative one. It also became a competition for who could be more evil. On the 6th of June 1992, Louis took the band's hatred for Christianity to the next level. He travelled to Bergen and set alight a 12th century church called Fantoft Stave Church. This would be just the first church burnings by many members of the black metal scene in Norway. It was initially believed by the authorities that Fantoft Stave Church had burnt down due to a lightning strike or electrical failure, but as 7 further churches were burnt down between June 1992 and January of 1993, it quickly became clear to the authorities and media that there was a direct attack taking place. During this period, Euronymous had actually closed his shop in Oslo, citing police suspicion as his reasoning, though it would later emerge that it was actually his parents who had instructed him to do so. In January of 1993, not long after the last burning of a church in Norway, Louis invited a reporter from a local Oslo newspaper to his apartment. His apartment was a loft apartment and was decorated with paraphernalia, weapons, and satanic symbols. The windows in the apartment had all been blacked out with carpet. It was described as entering a different world when you step foot in the apartment, like walking into hell itself. Louis then spoke to this reporter and proudly informed them on record that it was the black metal scene that had burnt down the churches and that they had declared war on Christianity and Norwegian society. He further told the reporter that they intended to continue their campaign of terror against Christianity. On top of all this, Louis claims the black metal scene to have been responsible for the murder of a man in Lillehammer. We'll come back to this in a moment. After this article was released, the police began to try to find any evidence that could directly link Louis to the Fantoft Stave Church arson attack, but were unable to find anything. Though in 1993, Louis released a EP for his one-man band, and this EP was called Ashes, and it featured a photograph of the Fantoft Stave Church burnt down in ashes, which is why I guess the EP was called Ashes as the album art. It is believed that Louis had taken that photograph himself. This article placed a massive magnifying glass on the black metal scene in Norway from both the authorities and the media. The Norwegian authorities were quick to bring the band Mayhem, its associates, and other bands in the black metal scene in for questioning. They even set up a specialized task force just to investigate the criminal happenings going on in the black metal scene. The police began to suspect from these interrogations that Necrobutcher had actually been responsible for the church burnings, but they had no real evidence against him. Necrobutcher would later reveal in an interview with The Guardian that he and Hellhammer had both been against the church burnings. He also reveals that he had met a girl at a party who he had taken back to his place, and the following morning she had told him that she had in fact burnt down some of the churches the police had suspected him of destroying. Necrobutcher later described this girl to have been a black metal girl at the time, who was now a girl. But these church burnings were not by any means the most evil action taken by the band Mayhem, and surprisingly it was neither Euronymous or Louis who took it to the next level. One of the people that Euronymous had been pen pals with and had hired to work at his shop, the same young man who had been 13 when he had first started talking with Euronymous, was called, I'm going to put it on the screen, I'm just going to refer to him as Ethan in this episode. Ethan had been visiting his family in Lillehammer on the 21st of August 1992 and had gone to a local pub to hang out. Though, on his way back home from the pub, he passed through the Olympic Park, which was a popular gay cruising spot at the time. Ethan was approached by a man called Magni Andresen, who was drunk, and he asked Ethan for sex. Ethan said sure, and they walked together into the nearby woods. That was when Ethan pulled out a knife and stabbed Magni 37 times. Even after Magni had been murdered, he continued to kick him in the head. Ethan returned to Oslo the following day, and the murder actually went cold for about a year. He had told Euronymous, Louis, and other people in the black metal scene what he had done, and he expressed and showed no remorse whatsoever. The police wouldn't find out that he was responsible till the year after, when he was brought to trial and sentenced for the murder. Following Louis' article and the subsequent media spotlight on the band, the European press quickly began to associate the church burnings and the black metal scene with theistic Satanism. Louis, Mayhem, and other bands began to gain a cult following, and many people began to idolize them. Some copycat church burnings also followed as a result. According to an article on Miss Memphis Pellis.com. It was these church burnings that allowed Louis to exercise an insatiable need for control. The church burnings had been the first step for his learning process of instrumental aggressing. Instrumental aggression is the act of utilizing force or violence to obtain a readily apparent goal, such as power, money, sexual gratification, and Louis, in this recurring case, was social power. Louis even shared after the church burnings to those in the Black Circle that he would not ever be caught for what he had done because he had gained the respect in the Norwegian black metal scene. Thus, nobody would dare to expose him of his actions. Through the power he had gained from the church burnings, it allowed him to live his fantasies as this master of the universe that he desired to attain. But despite his newfound fame, which brought a lot of attention to his one-man band Burzum, he still was in the shadow of Euronymous, who many in the scene hailed to be the leader, and it became common knowledge that this rivalry between Louis and Euronymous would eventually result in bodily harm or even death. They knew that there was no avoiding a final fight between the pair that could result in either of their deaths. And you can't forget that Louis' band Burzum was still signed to Euronymous' record label, which further concreted his position as the leader of the scene. Euronymous was still very threatened by Louis, and due to this insecurity, he began to send death threats to him. According to one source, Euronymous had wanted to start focusing more on the business side of music, and had become increasingly annoyed at Louis for developing and further creating this edgy and scary image by burning down churches and being violent. Louis was very much aware that Euronymous wanted him gone, and he had told people that Euronymous was just a poser and he wasn't true to the scene. He began to make plans to get Euronymous removed and kicked from the community. This played on one of Euronymous' biggest securities, that people didn't see him to be genuine and that he had to prove he was part of the Norwegian black metal scene. All this came to a climax when, in August of 1993, Euronymous sent a death threat to Louis that stated, "I'm going to send people to torture you until you die." Louis allegedly saw this as a real threat and decided that he would much rather it be Euronymous that died than him. And so on the night of the 10th of August 1993, Louis travelled to Euronymous' apartment with fellow Mayhem band member Blackthorn. Louis had asked Blackthorn to come with him to Euronymous' apartment for moral support, but Blackthorn agreed to go with him, but he'd refused to go inside. When they arrived at the apartment, Louis rang the intercom doorbell and asked to come in, though Euronymous said that he didn't want to and he'd just gone to bed. Louis had brought a contract along with him that Euronymous had sent to him to sign, and he told Euronymous over the intercom that he had brought this contract with him, and so Louis was let into the apartment. Blackthorn remained in the stairwell of the building smoking a cigarette, waiting for Louis to return. And when he did, Louis was covered in blood. He had stabbed Euronymous 23 times. They then fled the scene of the crime and disposed of the murder weapon in a small pond on the drive back home. Euronymous' death rippled through the black metal scene at top speed, and it was obvious to a lot of people that Louis had been the one responsible. Somebody in the black metal scene, after the murder had been reported on the news and the authorities were asking for anybody with any information to come forward, went to the police and told them that Louis was responsible. Louis was arrested a few days later on the 19th of August 1993. The majority of the more prominent people in the black metal scene were also arrested and questioned in connection to not only the murders, but also the church burnings. This included Blackthorn and another person who was aware that Louis had planned the murder. It wasn't long before holes began to appear in Blackthorn's and Louis's stories after intensive interrogations lasting over 7 hours. When Louis was arrested and his home was searched, they actually found 150 kilograms of explosives and over 3,000 rounds of ammunition. According to the Encyclopedia of White Power, Louis had intended to blow up a location popular with radical leftists and anarchist communities. The trial against Louis began on the 2nd of May 1994, and he claims that he hadn't intended to murder Euronymous. He told the courts they had gone to the apartment to hand Euronymous the contract, and when he stepped forward and confronted Euronymous about some royalty money that he owed him, Euronymous panicked and kicked him in the chest. Euronymous then ran into the kitchen and grabbed a knife. Louis and Euronymous then, according to Louis, got into a fight which resulted in Louis getting a knife from Euronymous and stabbing him to death. He also claims that Blackthorn had only come along to show Euronymous some new guitar riffs. Blackthorn also testified in court, and he reveals the true story of how it had been a premeditated murder, the account that we discussed earlier. The prosecution focused on the fact that Louis had asked a third person to stay in his apartment on the night of the murder, rent films, and use his credit card to make it seem as if he had remained at home. This, along with Blackthorn's testimony and the testimony of some others, and due to a fingerprint found in blood at the apartment that was identified to belong to Louis, was enough for the jury in the trial to reach a verdict. On the 16th of May 1994, Louis was found guilty for the murder of Euronymous, for arson of 3 churches, for attempted arson of a 4th church, and for the theft and storage of 150 kilograms of explosives. He was sentenced to the maximum sentence in Norway, which is just 21 years. Blackthorn was found guilty of being an accomplice to a homicide and was sentenced to 8 years imprisonment. And this case doesn't just end with those convictions. The band Mayhem had been set to release their first debut album right before Euronymous' murder and had to postpone it as a result. They actually released the album the same month of Louis' sentencing, which featured Euronymous playing the electric guitar and Louis playing the bass guitar. On the 17th of February 1995, a bootleg album that had recordings of Mayhem's live performances from a show in 1990 was released by War Master Records in South America. Euronymous had actually been in contact with War Master Records prior to his death, And remember those photographs he took of Dead's body? He sent one of them to War Master Records, who then used the image as the album art for a bootleg album. I'm going to show a censored version of this album art on screen now. Please skip ahead about 10 seconds if you don't wish to see it or avert your eyes. There's also a link in the description to the Wikipedia article that has the uncensored version. Putting it on screen now. As you can see, the image is graphic and horrific in nature, and it was extremely controversial when it was released for obvious reasons. Okay, the image is now off the screen. This case is one that deeply disturbs me on every level. Perhaps this is part in due to a lack of education and experience of the black metal scene, but it is definitely something that I would deem as very extremist and radical in nature. It's important to note that Nazism was also associated with the band and its members, and this case is just a really sad and evil one. After Louis and Blackthorn's arrest and Euronymous' murder, there were only 2 band members left in Mayhem, and the band kind of faded into the history books for about a year. They reformed in 1994 with the old members Hellhammer, Maniac, and Necrobutcher, along with a new member to take Euronymous' place. They began to release new music and tour through Europe, and was and still are very successful. Their top 5 records on Spotify all have over 1 million streams, and they are still active to this day. Louis himself also has a further backstory connection with neo-Nazism, but I honestly feel like you get the picture of what his character is like. On the 22nd of May 2009, Louis was released from prison on probation. He then made a YouTube channel titled Thulian Perspective, where he posts about European pagan mythology and his political views. He got married to a French woman in the early 2010s, and he was actually one of the people who was sent the manifesto of the man who killed 77 people, mostly teenagers and children, in the 2011 Norway attacks. This manifesto had been sent out prior to the attacks, and he just ignored it. On the 16th of July 2013, both Louis and his wife were arrested after his wife had purchased 4 firearms. The authorities believed they were planning acts of terrorism, but his wife actually had a firearms permit, and due to that, the charges against her were eventually dropped. Louis was, however, charged with inciting racial hatred against Jews and Muslims due to his online posts, and he was convicted in July of 2014 and sentenced to 16 months probation and an €8,000 fine. Louis' YouTube channel was deleted in June of 2019 due to his neo-Nazi views, but he remains active on Twitter. He actually released an album in March of this year, 2020, under his one-man band's name, Burzum. And that's really everything that I have for you in today's case. This one is really one that takes you to a land of horror and nightmares, and a lifestyle that the majority of us are so far removed from.
There are many instances of social media passing around theories of hidden cults just under our noses. A few years ago, hundreds of social media posts fueled the fire of a potential cult linked to a furniture retailer called Wayfair. Many shared their thoughts and concerns that a secret organization might be using the digital storefront to participate in human trafficking. However, not everything you hear online is the truth. This is a deep dive looking into a conspiracy theory of the alleged cult activities surrounding Wayfair.
Let's talk about a conspiracy theory involving a furniture company. Have you seen this? The company in question is American. It's called Wayfair. As you can see, it sells furniture and home goods, but it's recently had to deny it's part of a child trafficking ring.
Is Wayfair trafficking missing children? It's a question being asked by conspiracists across social media, from Twitter to Reddit to 4chan, even on TikTok. But what is the conspiracy theory, and is there any truth behind it? Let's delve into it. The earliest online post that I could find connected to this conspiracy, and perhaps the catalyst for it, was a tweet made by user Amazing Polly. It was tweeted on the 15th of June 2020, half a month before the theory would go viral. The tweet read, "My spidey senses are tingling. What's with these storage cabinets? Extremely high prices, all listed with girls' names, and identical units selling for different amounts." When you take a closer look at the image attached to the tweet, you can see numerous storage cabinets listed at ridiculously high prices, all with names of girls seemingly attached to them. The conversation about why the storage cabinets were so expensive and the importance of the names went mostly quiet until the 9th of July 2020, when a post was submitted to the r/conspiracy subreddit on reddit.com. Now, just as a bit of context to that subreddit, it is well known within the online community that the r/conspiracy subreddit oftentimes is filled with far-reaching theories that barely make any sense. Let's take a look at what the post said. Is it possible that Wayfair is involved in human trafficking with their WFX utility collection? Or are these just extremely overpriced cabinets? Note the names of the cabinets. This makes me sick to my stomach if it's true. The image attached to the Reddit post is similar to the one posted by Amazing Polly on Twitter, showing the highly priced cabinets with strange names. This Reddit post blew up quickly on the conspiracy subreddit and soon found its way back onto Twitter and other social media, with hundreds of thousands of people putting on their detective hats to investigate the claims. Seeing all these wild claims online that somehow Wayfair is trafficking missing children right in front of our eyes, I decided to jump down the rabbit hole and uncover all the evidence that conspiracists have in this case. The most prominent piece of evidence circulating is this screenshot of an industrial-grade storage cabinet. The storage cabinet itself is honestly fairly standard and fairly ugly, and you'd expect such an industrial cabinet to be up for sale for a couple $100s, but no. Is actually on sale for almost $15,000. And when you take a closer look at the name of the cabinet, you can see it's called Yaritza. The high price and the curious name led a lot of social media users to believe that something untoward was taking place, such as potential child trafficking. Out of curiosity, I decided to search the name Yaritza, which is a fairly unique or uncommon name, against the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children database, and it struck a match. Yaritza Castro is a 16-year-old girl born on the 15th of October 2003 who went missing on the 10th of June 2020 earlier this year from Harwinton, Connecticut. Yaritza is biracial, has brown eyes and brown hair. She's about 5'2" and weighs around 125 pounds. If you or anyone you know may have any information that could help bring Yaritza home, please do not hesitate to contact the tip line at 1-800-THE-LOST or 1-800-843-5678. You can also submit tips online on the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's website. For every missing person discussed in this episode, I will be displaying their missing poster on screen along with links to more information in the description and the pinned comment. I decided that this could easily be a fluke, a coincidence, so I moved on to the next cabinet that was circling around the internet. The Annabelle 5-shelf storage cabinet, which was selling on Wayfair for just shy of $11,000 US. A quick Google search of Annabelle missing brings up a news article that was last updated on the 12th of July 2020, earlier this month. The news article speaks of a missing 16-year-old girl from Kansas City, Annabelle Wilson, who disappeared on the 9th of July 2020. Another cabinet with the name Kyla, when searched, corresponds to a missing persons case for 16-year-old Kyla Coleman. The list goes on and on, with numerous different industrial-grade storage cabinets carrying these high prices and oftentimes rare names that some people are linking to missing person cases. It's important to note that the majority of these industrial-grade storage cabinets on their listings all have identical photos. And it isn't just exclusive to cabinets. A Zodiac sign pillow priced at just shy of $20,000 US carried a very unique name. We've omitted the name in this episode for reasons that will become clear later on, but when you search this unique name, articles appear speaking of a missing 16-year-old boy with that same name. As I've said, we'll come back to this later on. This wasn't the only Zodiac pillow either. There are numerous different products listed on Wayfair which added to the conspiracy theory that Wayfair may actually be trafficking missing children. All these products are listed by a seller called WFX Utility.
Wayfair's website, just so we can show you all this ratchetness. Then I am going to go ahead and paste the SKU. Awesome. So here we have the Rogers leather 147-inch right-hand facing sectional with these very few pictures, but it's a $15,000 couch, give or take a few hundred. Oh wow, there's only one left in stock. That's odd. Well, that couch is already in my cart. It won't let me add more than one. So let's just go to our cart. You can see the same one here. You go to checkout, and my name is already pre-filled as Precious Harris. Who's Precious Harris? Well, let's see. The Missing and Exploited Children database says that Precious Harris has been missing since April 30th, 2020. She's from Cincinnati, Ohio, and just so happens that when I put the couch into the file ring checkout, it tells me who I'm buying so that I know for sure I'm getting the right child. Boycott Wayfair. Convict pedophiles. It's not that hard, people.
In that clip, notice how the woman uses the SKU code to search for the product. The SKU codes, or the stock keeping units, is a unique code that is used by companies to keep track of their stock. But when you take the SKU code from any of the listings and enter it into the yandex.com search engine and click on pictures, images of young children appear. Some of the SKU codes, when searched in this way, actually bring up results of a much more graphic nature, which I strongly recommend you do not go searching for. If you take any of the SKU codes associated with any of the suspected trafficking products and search it on Yandex, images of young children appear. Conspiracists over on Reddit then began to investigate even deeper, and they discovered a nightlight that was up for sale for just shy of 20,000 Great British pounds. The conspiracists noticed a strange symbol on the nightlight, and interestingly, this product is listed not by the usual WFX utility, but rather a seller called Isabel and Max. Some Redditors quickly drew the link between Isabel Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell of the Jeffrey Epstein case's sister, and this listing, but that's, in my opinion, a bit of a stretch. Upon inspection of the symbol and the symbols used in the logo of the seller, comparisons were made with two logos from a leaked FBI document. The document is called Symbols and Logos Used by to identify sexual preferences, and sure enough, the symbols for boy lover and little boy lover depict a close resemblance to the symbols used on the nightlight product. Discussions of a connection between Wayfair and Pizzagate exploded under the post. Had the internet just uncovered a high-level child trafficking ring? Is this just a reach by avid conspiracists? Let's take a look at who exactly Wayfair is as a company and their history to try to ascertain who is behind it. According to an article on Patch.com, in 2019, hundreds of Wayfair employees walked out of the company headquarters in Boston to protest the company's selling of furniture to contractors that furnish detention facilities for children seeking asylum along the United States-Mexico border. Wayfair sold some 16,000 mattresses and 100 bunk beds for use in the ICE detention centers. According to an article in the Washington Post, The federal agency had lost track of 1,475 children who had crossed the US-Mexico border on their own. Conspiracists believe that Wayfair had trafficked some of these missing children. In the wake of the protests by Wayfair employees, Wayfair donated $100,000 to the American Red Cross, though Wayfair still defends its sale of the furniture to this day. So what exactly is Wayfair and how does the company operate? The official Wayfair Wikipedia page details the following. Wayfair is an American e-commerce company that sells furniture and home goods. Their digital platform offers 14 million items from more than 11,000 global suppliers. Wayfair has offices and warehouses throughout the United States, as well as in Canada, Germany, Ireland, and the United Kingdom. The company was founded by Niraj Shah and Steve Konin, who still operate the company to this day. Now, interestingly, if you take a look at the trademarks that Wayfair holds, a particular entry stands out. Remember who the vendor of the industrial storage cabinets was? WFX Utility. The trademark WFX Utility is owned and always has been owned by Wayfair. Initially, a lot of people on social media gave Wayfair the benefit of the doubt, as Wayfair acts almost like the Amazon of furniture, allowing third parties to sell through their platform. Perhaps this was just a rogue third-party seller. But no, Wayfair owns the trademark, indicating the company's involvement with this vendor to a degree. Let's go back and take a closer look at Wayfair's founders, in particular Wayfair's CEO, Niraj Shah. Niraj actually founded a youth-focused organization called the Shah Family Foundation, which does, quote, transformative work in education, healthcare, and the community in the Boston area. Niraj's wife Jill is actually the foundation's president. Conspiracists were quick to discover that both Niraj and Jill actually went to the Sun Valley Summit for the world's top tycoons, aka the summer camp for billionaires, in 2015. So who else attended this summit? Harvey Weinstein, Jack Dorsey of Twitter, Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, Tim Cook, and many, many others. Conspiracists looked into the charity background of these prominent figures and noted that they all operated foundations and charities for children. It's a bit of a leap, in my opinion, to go from a bunch of billionaires giving back to the community or, using charity to offset taxes to child trafficking through these foundations, but as I said earlier, the r/conspiracy subreddit is really one full of conspiracists on the wilder side. You can believe what you want. Now, going back to the people that run Wayfair, in 2018, Wayfair appointed Andrea Young to the board of directors. Why is this significant? Well, you'll have to bear with me with this connection. This is a very cliché conspiracy theory kind of link. Andrea Young was the first female CEO and chairman of the company Avon from 1992 until 2012. In 2010, she receives the Clinton Global Citizen Award. Conspiracists believe this proves a connection between Andrea and the Clintons, who they allege to be part of the pizza theory. But that's not all. In April of 2014, Andrea Young became the president and CEO of Grameen America, which is a non-profit microfinance organization. And who was the senior advisor at Grameen America, who surely had constant contacts with the company's president and CEO? Isabel Maxwell. Isabel Maxwell is the sister of Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein's closest friend and accomplice in their sex trafficking ring. Does this mean a connection between Epstein and Wayfair? But there's more. A photograph emerged of Ghislaine Maxwell and the alleged president of operations at Wayfair, Bill Hutchison. It seems to further concrete the Epstein connection for conspiracists in this case.
Hello guys, so I was going to show you a new couch, unboxing it. Here's the little girl coming in the box.
But I don't believe it, and here's why. Before any conspiracists try to say that I'm on the payroll or being controlled by a higher member of society or I'm in the Illuminati or something, the only person that I really answer to at the moment is my mother when she phones. So unless my mother is secretly heading the Illuminati, then I'm not sure what to tell you. Sure, I completely do believe, and evidence does prove, that there has been and may very well still be a trafficking ring operating amongst some of the world's social elites. The Epstein case and his little black book proves that to be true. If you want to learn more about the Epstein case, there's a documentary over on Netflix that goes through it. My friend Stephanie Harlow here on YouTube actually also covered the case in a few videos, so make sure you go check those out too. Let's break down the alleged evidence and go through it step by step. First of all, the picture of the alleged president of operations at Wayfair, Bill Hutchison. Unfortunately for the conspiracists in this case, Bill Hutchison has never worked at Wayfair. The company has never even had a president of operations position. There has never once been a mention of a Bill Hutchison on any official documentation linked to Wayfair or at any point on their website. Website archives prove that. Further, the man in the photograph is actually unidentified. Nobody knows who it might actually be. So that evidence is debunked. Next up, the connection between Andrea Young and Ghislaine Maxwell. The breadcrumb trail is indisputably there on Wikipedia. Hi, it's just Editing Josh, just jumping in really quickly. As of editing this, the breadcrumb trail has actually gone away. It's stopped. On Isabel Maxwell's Wikipedia page, there have since been edits made removing that line connecting her with Grey Mean America. Not sure what that means. Maybe she never actually was associated. Maybe it was added as part of this conspiracy, just so that someone had some evidence or something to connect it all together or something like that. I don't know. But I just thought I'd let you know that, it doesn't even matter because it got removed. But you can get from any Wikipedia article to Hitler's Wikipedia page within just 5 clicks. There's an entire game built around it, so I find that to be a massive reach, especially as there's no evidence to suggest, as far as I'm aware, that Isabel Maxwell had any direct involvement in the Epstein case. We don't know at what point Isabel Maxwell became a senior advisor at the Grey Mean America organization. We also don't know who Isabel was advising, or how many advisors there were, or even if there was any relationship between Isabel and Andrea. Further, the connection between Andrea and the Clintons doesn't seem anything more than Andrea just accepting an award. Many young people in the UK accept the Duke of Edinburgh Award from Prince Philip, but that doesn't mean we're all the best of friends with him. It seems to me like it's just an award presentation with a meal and nothing much more. Plus, I'm not entirely convinced of the Clintons' involvement in the theory, but that theory is really outside the scope of this video. Let's keep stepping through the evidence. Next, onto the nightlights. Unfortunately, the FBI symbols identified to be in use by people are fairly common, a swirl and a triangle. I'm not really convinced that there's much of a connection there either. Let's keep going. On to the more pressing pieces of evidence, the most damning in this case, and for some people, the most believable pieces of evidence. The actual products that Wayfair are selling on their websites. Remember how we discussed the zodiac sign pillow that had a very unique name attributed to it? Well, a quick Google search proves that fortunately the missing 16-year-old was actually found safe and well and had not been trafficked. Further, one of the missing people that were speculated or suspected to be connected to these trafficking cabinets, who went missing from Houston on the 7th of December 2017, was actually found safe and well on the 12th of December 2017. So she can't have been trafficked through Wayfair in 2020 because she was found in 2017. Another girl connected to the Wayfair conspiracy through just a simple Google search was also determined to have been found safe and well. In fact, the vast majority of the missing people that have been connected in some way to this case have either been found alive, safe and well, or were sadly found dead years ago, or they weren't even missing in the first place. One of the missing girls connected to this conspiracy is a girl named Samaya Moomin, who actually took to Facebook Live pretty recently to express her thoughts on this. The following clip contains strong language.
Why are y'all sharing some shit who this nigga don't even know that if it's really true or not? What are y'all talking about? Y'all all sound stupid talking about why am I mad? Because I'm not missing. Fuck out of here. Fuck. Let me go get a picture of you, bitch, and say you missing. And then put a little motherfucking cabinet next to it. And have everybody share that shit. Let's see how you feel. Fuck out of here. Weird as fuck. And I was never even missing to begin with. That's the whole, like, what? Y'all sound retarded. Never went missing. Never went missing. And y'all want to say, but why are you mad? Why are you mad? Because when I really go missing, what the fuck is y'all gonna do? Fuck is you talking about? What are you gonna do when I really go missing? I'm saying he's weird as fuck that the fact that this motherfucker's actually missing and he trying to put me next to a motherfucking cabinet. What the fuck are you talking about? Fuck out of here. Weird, that's weird. Like, it's motherfuckers seeing that in whole different cities and motherfucking states and shit, and y'all think this is a joke? Y'all talking about I'm missing. Okay, so what? I've been in the hospital fighting corona. Fuck is you talking about in the hospital fighting corona? Now, if I would have died about this shit, y'all shit sitting here got my name next to a motherfucking cabinet talking about I'm missing. Bitch.
Of course, some of the missing people linked to this case are genuine missing people. This conspiracy theory has been put in front of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, which has led to a vast number of people filing false tips to the police tip lines connected to those missing persons cases. In my opinion, this will have caused a massive amount of distraction for the investigators searching for those missing children, sending them on a wild goose chase when they could be looking into genuine leads. Please do not phone up the missing persons hotline and claim that these missing people, who have unfortunately been connected to this conspiracy, have been trafficked through Wayfair. Real trafficking could very well be involved in those cases, but claiming Wayfair is responsible is, in my opinion, simply taking away precious time and resources from the investigating officers in those cases. Now let's take a look at the evidence that when you enter a product's SKU code on yandex.com, images of children or more graphic results appear. As it actually turns out, you can enter absolutely any random number after searching SRC or SRC USA, and those kind of results will return. It's deeply disturbing that those results do return, but just goes to show how so many people took this screenshot evidence that was plastered across social media at face value and to be true. This is why not taking anything at face value that is this serious is important, and doing your own research is absolutely vital. Don't just believe what you read online. It's pretty straightforward. A simple Google search of almost all of the missing people connected to this conspiracy will show that they're not actually missing. Everybody just jumped on the trend and instantly believed it. Now let's see what Wayfair had to say about all of this. According to an article in Mashable.com, Wayfair said it removed the cabinets from their site to stamp out the rumours. There is, of course, no truth to these claims, a representative wrote to Mashable in a statement. The products in question are industrial-grade cabinets that are accurately priced. Recognizing that the photos and descriptions provided by the supplier did not adequately explain the high price points, we have temporarily removed the products from the site to rename them and to provide a more in-depth description and photos that accurately depict the product to clarify the price point. When this statement was released, believers in the conspiracy theory were quick to mock the statement, stating that, ooh, if Wayfair says they're not doing it, then it must be true, and stuff like that. Now, the final part of this puzzle is why exactly these products were so highly priced, and why they had these names in the first place that could have been linked to these alleged missing persons cases. Wayfair has over 14 million products on its website, and as well as many other online retailers such as Amazon, it uses algorithms to price and optimize their products to maximize profits. Algorithms that use artificial intelligence to maximize sales. Here's an extract from a TED Talk that discusses these algorithms.
There's a company in Boston called Nanex. mechanics. And they use math and magic and I don't know what, and they reach in to all the market data, and they find actually sometimes some of these algorithms, and when they find them, they pull them out and they pin them to the wall like butterflies. And they do what we've always done when confronted with huge amounts of data that we don't understand, which is that they give them a name and a story. So this is one that they found. They called the knife, the carnival, the Boston Shuffler, Twilight. And the gag is that, of course, these aren't just running through the market, right? You can find these kinds of things wherever you look once you learn how to look for them, right? You can find it here, this book about flies that you may have been looking at on Amazon. You may have noticed it when its price started at $1.7 million. It's out of print, still. If you had bought it at 1.7, it would have been a bargain. A few hours later, it had gone up to $23.6 million plus shipping and handling. And the question is, nobody was buying or selling anything. What was happening? And you see this behavior on Amazon as surely as you see it on Wall Street. And when you see this kind of behavior, what you see is the evidence of algorithms in conflict. Algorithms locked in loops with each other without any human oversight, without any adult supervision to say, actually, 1.7 million is plenty. You stick with that.
These algorithms essentially get mixed up with one another in a glitched war, making up and marking up these prices. Running alongside the pricing algorithms are algorithms that automatically update the data of products to make them appear higher on search results, like Google, which can generate more sales and more leads. These algorithms will use trending searches in specific areas and change product names and metadata so that when you search that specific keyword, Wayfair's or Amazon's or eBay's product will show up. And left unsupervised, as it would be insane to expect Wayfair, which is a fairly small company in the grand scheme of things, to monitor what's going on with all 14 million of their listed products. These algorithms lack the human ability to distinguish between people searching for a particular kind of wardrobe that is trending at the time and people searching for missing people's names. To the algorithms, to the artificial intelligence, the names of missing people and the kind of wardrobes are the same thing. It's just a trend that is being told to try and profit from. I don't think Wayfair, when they released their initial statement, which they released very quickly after the conspiracy theory entered the mainstream social media, I don't think they had taken the time to properly investigate what was actually happening behind the scenes. They just wanted to try and quash the entire event, try and get rid of it, because it's some pretty heavy allegations. I have 4 qualifications in computer science and a foundation's degree in robotics engineering, which I established before I then began my criminology and law degree, and I am by no means saying that I'm an expert at all at this, but this to me and in my educated experience seems to be what's taking place here. So much is automated through artificial intelligence and algorithms, stuff that you wouldn't even think would be, and I think this is simply a case of that. Artificial intelligence gone wrong. Artificial intelligence that hasn't been properly monitored or properly trained. Overall, I don't believe that Wayfair is trafficking children. I don't agree with their deals supplying ICE detention centres, but it's definitely a gigantic stretch to say anything else is taking place. Why would Wayfair traffic children in such an open forum rather than, say, on the dark web or via other methods? Do you expect me to believe that they're really that stupid? You pay with your debit or credit card on Wayfair. Every transaction is completely traceable and trackable. As for the screen recording of the woman trying to buy a piece of furniture and the name pre-filling, how are we to know that she hadn't already filled that out to feed into the conspiracy? That screen recording cannot be proven to be real as it doesn't come from a reliable source. And the video was shared and re-uploaded and shared and re-uploaded by numerous people, so we don't know for sure. We can't be sure that what happened in that video is 100% accurate and 100% real, and it can't be verified. This all takes away from what's really going on in the world. The real world of human trafficking, something that is very much a global issue happening right in front of our noses. In 2019, according to FBI statistics, there were 609,725 missing person records filed, with over half of those cases being missing juveniles under the age of 18. According to the organisation Thorn, in 2018, an estimated 1 out of 7 endangered runaways reported to the National Centre of Missing and Exploited Children were likely child sex trafficking victims. I've left a link to Thorn at the top of the description. There are also links to charities and organisations linked below if you or anyone you know has been affected by the topics discussed in today's video.
Though some of the cases in this compilation discuss instances of mistaken cult activities, the case of the Order of the Solar Temple stands out for being the exact opposite. This case covers the creation, timeline, and crimes of a cult that would claim over 70 lives throughout the peak of its activities. Though not all were murders outright, there's no denying that this organization was a lethal example of a true-to-form cult.
The Order of the Solar Temple, officially known as the Ordre du Temple Solaire, was founded in Geneva, Switzerland in 1984 by founders Luc Jouret and Joseph Di Mambro. The Solar Temple cult based its ideals on the revival of the Knights of Templar order, the Knights of Templar being a Catholic military order founded in the 12th century by a group of knights who were tasked to guard the Holy Grail. The Knights of Templar in itself are a whole different story, so if you're interested in that, then make sure you do some research into that. This order, the Knights of Templar, was actually suppressed by the Pope in 1302 after becoming a powerful group of warriors during the Crusades. The Knights of Templar remained inactive until 1805, just a few years after the French Revolution. In 1805, Bernard Raymond Fabre-Palaprat, a French physician, somehow came to the conclusion that he was the successor to the secret line of the Knights of Templar Grand Masters, and decided to take upon himself to reinstate the order. This new order was very successful and was well known at the time. Many significant relics had come into the order's possession. Relics dating back to the medieval times, which included, but wasn't limited to, swords, helmets, and bone fragments. Now, Bernard Raymond Fabre-Palaprat, I'm butchering that name, I am so sorry, successfully ran this new Knights Templar order for a significant number of years, until he passed away in 1838. His death led to the order splitting into many different factions. Now, these factions ran in similar ways to one another, but they each highlighted different points as their main reason for existing. This meant that they couldn't merge together or come together as one anymore, as they all believed their way of worship was the best way, the only true way. While many of these factions eventually disappeared over time, there were a few that withstood the test of time. It was in these remaining factions that we find the two main people involved in this case. Luc Jouret was born on the 18th of October 1947 in the Belgian Congo. The Belgian Congo was located in the central region of Africa and was occupied by a European majority until it declared its independence in 1960, another case of colonizers. By this point, the Jouret family had already moved back to their home country of Belgium, moving at some point in the late 1950s. After graduating high school, Luc attended the Free University of Brussels and graduated with a medical degree in 1974. 2 years after finishing his medical degree in 1976, he joined the Belgian army to become a paratrooper, because that's, you know, you become a doctor, you get your medical degree, and you just decide to go be a paratrooper. You know, why not? It's the 70s, anything goes. During his time as a paratrooper, he fought in the Battle of Kolwezi, which was an airborne operation in May 1978 to rescue 2,000 European hostages from a group of highly political Congolese nationals in the mining town of Kolwezi. After serving a few years, Luc left the Belgian army and established a medical practice in France, which specialized in alternative medicine. During the time he was running his practice, he qualified as a homeopathic practitioner. Homeopathy is an alternative treatment based upon the use of highly diluted substances, which practitioners claim can cause the body to heal itself. Luc spent a lot of his time traveling the world, learning various forms of spiritual and alternate healing. Spending time during 1977 in the Philippines, learning about psychic healing before moving on to China, Peru, and even India. By the early 80s, Luc had finished his travels and had settled down in Annemasse, France, close to the Swiss border. With his life now settling down, he decided that now was the best time for him to start a family. Luc courted, dated, and married a woman named Christine, and within a year of their marriage, they were excited to introduce a baby into their small family. Unfortunately for the pair, the infant passed away shortly after birth, and subsequently the marriage crumbled. After only a few years of marriage, the loss of their child became too much for the pair, so they divorced and parted ways. After losing his child and divorcing his wife, Luc packed himself back up and started traveling again. During his time running his alternative medicine practice, he had gained a loyal following who loved his teachings and homeopathic techniques. By the late 1980s, he'd become a popular speaker on alternative medicine and had travelled to many French-speaking countries to attend conferences, including Canada. It was during these travels that Luc started his dive into the occult. He joined the Golden Way Foundation in Geneva, where he regularly held conferences and became one of their regular speakers. It was during these conferences that he met Joseph de Mambro. Joseph de Mambro was born on August 19th, 1924 to parents Raphael and Fernand de Mambro in rural southern France. He was the oldest of three siblings, having both a younger brother and sister. He attended a private Catholic school for his whole academic career and was an above-average student who loved playing the violin. By the time he was 16 years old, World War II had broken out and it stunted his academic career, forcing him into work. And he managed to find work at a jewellery shop. While working at this shop, he also learnt the art of clockmaking, which was actually a popular career choice at the time. In March 1944, Joseph married a girl from his hometown called Nanine, who, like him, had a passion for music. Together they had a son who they named Bernard, who would later go on to become a French actor. While life was good for the de Mambro family, Joseph was still never fully content with his life. He had always been interested in the occult, and in January of 1956, he gave into this interest and joined the ancient and mystical order of the Rosea Crucis at the age of 32. It is theorized that Joseph's obsession with the occult stems from the disappearance of his father just after the end of the war, with no one in his family knowing why he abandoned them and the family never getting answers. It is believed that this was why he enjoyed being part of a cult. The cults filled this empty space left behind by his father and served as a second family to him. This cult, the ancient and mystical order of the Rosea Crucis, enjoyed great success in France in the years during and following World War II. And in the late 1960s, Joseph became the head of his faction in Nîmes, France, and he stayed in this position until he was 45 in 1969. In 1970, Joseph gave up his jeweller career to become a full-time lecturer for the New Age movement, another cult that he had joined. Joseph was collecting cults as if they were Pokemon cards, I'll be honest. Gotta join them all. And in 1973, just 4 years after he left his job at the jewellery shop, he founded his first cult, a cult of his own. This cult was named the Centre for the Preparation, which Joseph ran with New Age movement ideals. He spent 3 years running this cult, leading his followers through their day-to-day activities, which included performing esoteric ceremonies and preparing for the, quote, New Age. This was the main philosophy of the group. They believed the universe was about to transform, and they were the first people to be received into this new world. This group lived communally in Animus, France, and the members spent a majority of their time preparing their bodies and spirits for passage into this new world under Joseph's teaching. By 1976, Joseph was well known within the occult community in Europe after heading 2 different communal cult factions of his Centre for the Preparation in both Animus, France, and in Geneva, Switzerland. During his time in Geneva, Joseph progressed himself as a teacher and began to present himself as a part of the, quote, Great White Brotherhood. Now, I'll be honest, when I first saw that, I thought this was going to be some KKK ass shit, but no, a closer look, it just seems to be a very unfortunate choice of name, to be honest. The Great White Brotherhood was a group of people who believed that they were perfected human beings. Gives me a bit of them Nazi vibes, that had been placed on Earth to guide the evolution of the human race. He claimed to be incarnations of multiple important historical figures, including Moses and the Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten, who was the father to the famous pharaoh Tutankhamun. In 1981, Luke, who by this point had become a Grand Master of the renowned Order of the Temple, left that cult over a dispute regarding policy matters. What that dispute was is left to the imagination. Maybe he just didn't get the parking space that he wanted, or maybe someone sat in his seats in the worship room, who knows. Joseph, who had become acquainted with Luke by this point due to their mutual interests and beliefs, persuaded him to, quote, combine energies with him and create a new organization. Luke promptly agreed, and in 1984 they founded the Order of the Solar Temple together. The Order of the Solar Temple was an elitist group who were very selective over who could join. The selection process was used because Luke and Joseph believed that they were the heirs of the medieval Knights of Templar who guarded the Holy Grail. The Knights of Templar are easily recognizable from history due to their infamous white robes with a large red cross adorned on their chests and shields. Luke and Joseph believed that their teachings were only to be heard by a select portion of the population due to their alleged direct link to the Holy Grail and these historic knights. Due to these elitist views, there were many different elements required to join the cults. Not so shockingly, one of the main requirements was a larger than average bank account, meaning you were able to make sizable donations to the group. Luke was the public face of the organization, charismatic enough to recruit new followers into the cult, while Joseph did all the other work, the finances, rituals, and meditations. The Order of the Solar Temple became a hybrid cult, which mixed Joseph's Golden Way ideology and Luke's own ideas on holistics and alternative medicines. The cults fused elements of Christianity, New Age philosophy, and astrology together, blending together occultism with a belief in the coming New Age and Masonic rituals. With Joseph still preaching that he was the reincarnation of Moses from the Bible, and that it was his personal mission to guide humanity to enlightenment, many members truly believed that they were a part of something special. In 1982, Joseph fathered a child with one of the cult members, Dominique Belleton. Joseph was thrilled with the birth of this child, who he named Emanuela. At this time, Joseph was 58 years old and believed that his daughter was a divine gift from a higher being. He stated that she was, quote, a cosmic being who would lead in the coming new age. And this was accepted throughout the cults, as members believed that she was conceived through immaculate conception. Because of the elitist tendencies of the order, the cult attracted lots of successful and rich members from various upper and upper middle class livelihoods. These people were usually disengaged with conventional churches and religions, as they believed they were part of a higher plan and more important than other humans. By this point, the Order of the Solar Temple had amassed nearly 1,000 members across Canada, Switzerland, and France, with each country having their own sects, which fed into the headquarters in Geneva. Luke and Joseph decided that they needed to create a new level of management who would help them run the now international sects. This new level of management consisted of 33 higher members who were part of a more trusted group. Joseph decided that because his daughter was a, quote, cosmic being, any children that were created through his choice would also become a higher being. Because of this, he took it upon himself to choose mates for people within the order and encourage them to have children. He truly believes that these children would be, quote, special children who would assist his own daughter in her new age task. Once a child was conceived with the chosen couples, he would then rearrange the members so that they would be able to create more special children without contaminating the bloodlines. While Joseph was dealing with the day-to-day activities in the cult in Geneva, leading ceremonies and readings, Luke was out in the world running courses and seminars for recruitment purposes, and parading around as a New Age teacher. Joseph and Luke led the cults from different sects and as astrocrats. This meant that they didn't take into account what the other was doing and never discussed the different ideas that they had for the future of the order. They regularly butted heads and fought for superiority, often leading to some confusion from their followers. When joining the order, members had access to special publications and fancy over-the-top initiations which were filmed for the initiates to keep. Luckily for most people, their faces were blurred in these videos, whether they were an initiate or a member who was just helping with the initiation. In these initiations, Joseph stated that he was a representative for the higher beings they were trying to please, and that he was the receiver and transmitter of their divine messages. During the various ceremonies that he held, he would always, quote, receive important messages for the order, which would dictate how they would proceed with their day-to-day lives to ensure that they kept these higher beings happy. The Order of the Solar Temple believed that Jesus was a solar god king and would be coming back down to earth once it was ready for him. By this point, Luke and Joseph were regularly asking members to give them money to help them fulfill the wants of these higher beings. And with this money, they began opening more lodges and stationing their most trusted members to run each new place, entrusting them to initiate more people into the order. In the early 90s, after years of Luke and Joseph promising that these higher beings were coming, members began to challenge their authority, demanding answers. Many members were wanting to know where their money was going, as by this point they had stopped opening up new sects, but Luke and Joseph were still asking for more money from the members. And further to this, Joseph's own daughter, who was now a teenager, began turning against him and started questioning the existence of the higher beings. The long-held peace that had been present throughout the order began to crumble. Emanuela, as most teenagers do, was starting to challenge her parents, and the biggest thing she did was expose some of the illusions that her father had used during demonstrations to members. These illusions were used to create a convincing spiritual apparition during initiation ceremonies to ensure that members believed that the higher beings were happy with the new initiates. Many cult members had been told by Luke that they were light beings who had been reincarnated on Earth with a special mission to fulfill. But too much time had passed, and the promised new age of consciousness had still not arrived, causing many members to become unhappy and impatient. In 1991, one member even filed a lawsuit against the order after he had left the ranks a few months prior. Their charade was beginning to shatter completely. By this point, there were quite a few people who had already jumped ship from the order, especially after Luke had been arrested in Canada for attempting to purchase illegal firearms. The police hypothesized that this would have been the start of the cult's killing spree if they hadn't arrested him for purchasing these firearms. However, by 1992, Luke and Joseph had made too many unfulfilled predictions and promises, and some of their followers began to doubt the existence of the great masters. As well as these unfulfilled promises, Joseph's health had begun to deteriorate. He had become incontinent and had actually been diagnosed with cancer, which he had kept secret from the order for months. Eventually, Luke and Joseph decided that they needed to come up with a way to restore the faith of their followers. Them losing followers meant they were losing donations and they were losing money. So they just wanted more money, really. With the structure of the order crumbling around them, Luke and Joseph started to prepare for their, quote, transition to another world. This began with them choosing specific people who they believed would be the most welcome in this new world and telling them what rituals they needed to do to transition. While they prepared for this transition, they also decided to take revenge on some of the former members of the cult. The first victims of this transition was a 35-year-old Swiss man, his wife, and their 3-month-old baby boy, the Dutoit family. This family was murdered in Morin Heights, Quebec, on the 3rd of October 1994. The Dutoits were previous members of the Order of the Solar Temple, but decided to leave the order after Nikki had become pregnant with her husband's child. They left after Joseph tried to break them up and after he had forbidden them to have the child together, as it wasn't what the higher beings wanted. The final nail in their coffin in the cult's eyes was the Dutoits naming their child Christopher Emmanuel Dutoit. Joseph took this as a direct challenge by the Dutoits for his daughter's place in the order and in the new world by using the name Emmanuel. Angered by their betrayal and his cult falling apart around him, Joseph decided that they needed to be punished. Members of the Solar Temple cult arrived at the Dutoits' apartments and proceeded to stab their 3-month-old baby in the heart after Joseph identified the child as the Antichrist. According to Joseph, the only way to kill the Antichrist was with a knife through the heart. After watching these two people kill their child, the parents were murdered in the same manner, being stabbed to death. 4 days after the family was killed, their apartment was set on fire. When the police arrived on the scene, there was little left of the family home, and the bodies had been badly burnt. It wasn't until other similar murder-suicides started popping up that the police had any idea what they were dealing with: a mass murdering cult. On the 5th of October 1994, 23 people were found dead in a burning chalet in Chary, Switzerland. 18 of these were found in a room with their bodies arranged in a circle as if they were the spokes of a wheel. They were found to be wearing ceremonial robes. These 18 were determined to have been given a tranquilizer before being shot, and then their bodies were arranged in a predetermined pattern. This pattern was suspected to have been used as it was believed that it would please the higher beings and allow them to safely transition into this new world. A member of the police who was on the scene stated that, quote, "It was frightful to enter a place like that and find so many dead." Amongst the dead at this chalet was a mayor and his wife, Joseph DeMambro, and a well-known reporter. Less than an hour later, 160 kilometers away, 25 more bodies were discovered in 2 burning chalets. All of these deaths followed the same pattern, with the majority of the bodies being tranquilized before being shot, and then the remaining people setting the rooms on fire and burning alive inside. It was later concluded that out of the total 52 that had died, only 15 were suicides, and it was only those 15 people who knew what was going to happen to them during these transition ceremonies. The other 37 people involved were unaware that they were going to die and thought they were just taking a drug that would make them more receptive to the transition. Luke and Joseph were amongst those who had committed suicide after having a last supper with their most trusted members in each chalet they were in. It would seem that Luke and Joseph were finally able to convince their members that the apocalypse was truly at hand. At the time of the mass deaths, the authorities in both Canada and France were trying to arrest Luc and Joseph for being the masterminds behind the murders of the Dutoits. With no one to charge for these mass deaths, as the leaders had also died, the police were at a loss on what to do. Any remaining members of the Order of the Solar Temple quickly hid, and it would seem like that would be the end of the Order. Unfortunately, that was not the case. The next year, in 1995, 16 more people who had not been invited to the original transition event died at their own hands in a forest near Grenoble, France. Once again, the police had no one to charge for these deaths, as they were willing participants, as well as the fact that they could not find who had taken over the order after Luc and Joseph had died the previous year. They didn't know who was in charge anymore. A final 5 people died in Canada on the 22nd of March 1997 with the same cause of death. They were burned alive, and it happened during the spring equinox. As far as we know, there are no more sects of the Order of the Solar Temple still running today, but we can never be truly sure. By the end of the Order of the Solar Temple, 74 people had died. This included 11 children, as well as the 2 founders of the cult, Luc and Joseph. This case played out just as you would first suspect a case about a cult to do so. It ended in unnecessary deaths, especially of young impressionable children who hadn't had the time to grow up and find their own path for themselves and discover what they believed in. Any religion or movement or cult or gathering which requires you to kill yourself at the end of it, not a good idea to join it. I'll be honest.
Thank you for revisiting these older videos with me. I've been wanting to do a compilation video of some of my older works for a while now, and I hope that you found these cultish cases just as interesting and curious as I did. Which of these cases interested you the most? Please let me know in the comments down below. I want to know all your thoughts. I'm especially interested in hearing your opinions on the cases that feature cults that may or may not exist. If you have a case that you'd be interested in seeing me cover on this channel, then please let me know by sending in your case suggestions to requestacase.com. And if you prefer to listen to my videos in audio form, you can listen to them all over on Spotify via the link in the description. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to quickly note that I did put a post up earlier in the week when this is going out. So this is going out on the Sunday, and I put a post up, I think, on the Monday, just explaining where it's been and what's been going on. I don't really want to go in on camera or anything like that. But I'll leave a link to that post in the description too, and I'll put something in the pinned comment, just like summarizing that up, just to let you know what's been going on and everything, and where I've been and why there's been no videos, that kind of thing. But I just wanted to mention that in this video that I'm back now. We're back, and yeah, that's all. So with all that being said, I'll see you in the next case.